Chapter 401. The hardest part about killing the manticores was controlling them. Among the 9 adult and young manticores, 2 of them had the strength of an elite wizard, 3 of them had the strength of an experienced wizard, and the remaining 4 were basically new wizards. With this kind of strength, they could definitely crush Grimm's team. After all, they only had 1 explosive elite wizard, Grimm, and 2 veteran wizards, Gargamel and Lin Yao. As for the other adventurers and potion apprentices, they could barely be used as shields. Relying on them to hold up a solid line of defense would be like a mantis try to stop a chariot, and they would definitely end up badly. Therefore, if the weak wanted to win, the only way was to set up a trap and lure the manticores into a narrow area to reduce their advantage in numbers. The reason why Grimm dared to do this was because of his understanding of the manticores. Although manticores were fierce monsters, they did not have any long-range attack skills, which was the main reason why they were never on the stage. If not for the special environment of the underground passage, their combat power would be even lower than that of the wyverns. As dawn approached, the manticores that had gone out to hunt once again began to return to their nest in large numbers. As soon as they stepped into the underground passage, the 2 elite manticores at the front became restless. In the past, when Grimm and Gargamel broke in, they would try to hide their scent and erase the traces they left behind. But this time, other than them, even the adventurers had broken in with torches in their hands. The strong scent of humans and the burnt smell of burning torches in the passage were like a lighthouse in the dark. It could not be more obvious. Their nest had been broken into by a group of humans. The leader of the manticores was furious, but could not help but worry for the 2 young manticores guarding the nest. Under its urging, the manticores abandoned their prey and flapped their bat wings, following the scent left behind by the humans into the depths of the underground. The more they flew, the more worried they became. The path the humans were taking was actually leading to their hidden nest. This made the manticores very anxious. Finally, at a key intersection outside the nest, they smelled the scent of the young manticores. Mixed with the scent of the young manticores was the burnt smell of elemental flames and a faint smell of blood. The former indicated that human sorcerers were involved, while the latter made the manticores especially furious. In less than a quarter of an hour, they had searched the entire nest, but did not find any trace of the enemy. Relying on their keen sense of smell, they realized that the enemy did not escape. Instead, they carried the little manticore and headed deeper into the ground. Under the leadership of the 2 elite male and female manticores, the manticores followed the scent all the way down. Finally, they found 2 tightly bound manticores and a large pile of clothes left behind by the human mercenaries in a dangerous underground area. Just as they were frantically tearing at the ropes on the little manticore's body, Grimm led Gargamel and the others from behind and firmly occupied the entrance to this dangerous place. The so-called underground danger zone actually referred to a small area with only 1 entrance and no other passageways. Such caves and caverns could be found everywhere in the underground world. It was also a place that the underground exploration teams both loved and hated. If you were a member of an exploration team, it was undoubtedly the best place to set up camp when the team was resting. As long as the only entrance and exit was blocked and someone was sent to stand guard, the team would not have to worry about being ambushed. However, if you encountered a large number of underground creatures, it would be easy for an exploration team to be wiped out in one fell swoop. That was why their existence was loved and hated, and it was difficult to choose. The underground cave that Grimm had chosen for the manticores was a funnel-shaped cave that had been stepped on many times. Apart from this one and only entrance, there were no other passageways for them to pass through. The only entrance was 4 meters wide and 3 meters high. It could only allow 1 adult manticore to fly through or 2 manticores to squeeze through. When Grimm found out that the manticores had fallen into his trap, he immediately cut off their escape route. As soon as they arrived at the entrance, Grimm released roaring and rotting. The rocky roaring was responsible for blocking the way, while he and rotting were responsible for attacking from the sides. As for the other members of the team, They were scattered around to prevent other underground creatures from causing trouble. Gargamel, on the other hand, cast a spell to detonate the many traps hidden in the cave. A large number of wormwood and a small number of ghost mushrooms were ignited. They began to create pungent smoke and a horrible stench in every corner of the cave, as well as fungal spores flying everywhere. They quickly consumed the air in the cave. As all the secret passages and cracks had been blocked in advance, the thick smoke and poisonous gas could not leak out. In an instant, the cave and the manticores inside were completely submerged. Amidst the suffocating smoke, the sound of coughing and the flapping of the manticore's wings could be heard, mixed with the thunderous roars of the leader of the manticores. Roaring was a giant stone golem that was 4 meters tall and weighed 35 tons. It was also covered in a thick layer of rock armor. As the only meat shield for the day, it gave up all opportunities to attack. It only condensed a huge rock in its hand as a shield to defend with all its might. Just as it finished its defensive stance, the smoke in the cave parted. A violent manticore with a violent gust of wind slammed into the shield in its hand. It was a loud bang. The rock, more than a meter thick, was instantly smashed into pieces. Roaring's heavy body suddenly staggered backward. The friction between its rocky feet and the hard floor even created dazzling sparks. The adult manticore's head was also bleeding. It swayed its body and fell into a dizzy state at the entrance of the cave. Before either side could react, Grim stood behind the roar and threw an enhanced version of lava fireball at the foot of the injured manticore. At the same time, Rotting's corrosive liquid ball also landed on the manticore's body. It was as if a large basin of strong acid had been poured on its body. The injured manticore was still in a dizzy state when it let out a mournful cry from the corrosive acid. Its majestic mane quickly disappeared, and its hard, leather-like brown skin made strange, sizzling sounds as it corroded. In the next second, the lava fireball exploded. The violent and ferocious shockwave sent the manticore flying into the air. Its entire chest and abdomen were a mess of flesh and blood. As for the splashing of lava fragments and magma, it turned the inside of the cave into a terrible sea of lava that ordinary people could not stand on. Just as this manticore gave way, a strong gust of wind blew, and another manticore pounced forward with the force of wind and thunder. This time, Roaring did not have a rock shield to protect its body. It could only use its pair of thick rock hands to block the manticore's attack. Boom! Another earth-shattering explosion resounded. The roarer's stone arms, which were 1/2 meter thick, were smashed into smithereens. If it hadn't sunk its 2 stone legs into the rock floor, it would have been sent flying by the impact. What a terrifying force! According to the AI chips monitoring, the impact strength of the 2 manticores had reached an astonishing 135 degrees. This was already an attack strength that ordinary magi could only dream of. The physique and strength of this manticore were also far better than the first one. After the violent impact, apart from its head bleeding and its fangs falling, it did not fall into a state of dizziness. Not only did it not fall into a state of dizziness, but the moment Roaring's hands disappeared, the scorpion tail behind it stabbed out like a gust of wind and fiercely stabbed into Roaring's rock armor. The 4-finger-thick rock armor was pierced through, and the terrifying poisonous stinger, as sharp as a hook, quickly injected paralyzing venom into Roaring's body. At the same time, Roaring lifted its right foot and slammed it down. A terrible invisible shockwave immediately began to spread in all directions with it as the center. All the individuals who came into contact with the shockwave could not help but jump in place. Their entire body muscles and bones trembled uncontrollably, and they lost the ability to further adapt. This ambushing manticore was obviously an elite-ranked creature. Whether it was physique or strength, it was not weaker than Roaring. Unfortunately, when the paralyzing venom was ineffective, it had no choice but to take the opponent's earth tremor. If it was any other manticore, it might need 3 to 5 fingers to get rid of the effect of losing control, but for an elite-ranked manticore, it could only lose control for a short moment. Unfortunately, this moment was enough for Grimm to launch an attack. Not daring to hold back, Grimm did not hesitate to use his strongest single-target fire spell from the secret voodoo poison scroll, Molten Core Explosion. With the support of the Destructive Flames wizard staff, Grimm's Molten Core Explosion could now reach a super high attack strength of 125 degrees, which was 10 degrees higher than the previous one. Don't look down on this difference of 10 degrees. It was built on the foundation of penetrating deep into the opponent's defense. In a normal battle between magi, everyone would think of ways to cast various elemental shields and defensive spells on themselves. Under these layers of protection, normal spells would not be able to penetrate their defense, so they could only use the method of consumption to slowly wear them down. The higher the strength of a single attack, the more likely it was to break through the opponent's defensive spell. Therefore, the opponent could only endure the overflowing elemental damage. As for the elite Manticore in front of him, the maximum witchcraft damage it could withstand was only 90 degrees. Although spells below 90 degrees could still cause some damage to the surface of its body, they could not break through the protective force field formed by its powerful life force. Therefore, the vital organs and key parts of its body could not be harmed. This was the foundation that ensured that it could continue to fight. Chapter 402. The elite Manticore could not help but raise its neck and let out a mournful cry. The violent elemental flames wreaked havoc around its body, burning its flesh and making sizzling sounds. The hair on the surface of its body instantly disappeared without a trace, and the exposed skin was covered with large and small blisters. Every time the blisters burst, sticky blood would spurt out. The elite Manticore that had only completed one attack hurriedly spread its wings and retreated to the depths of the smoke where no one could see. However, the elite Manticore's painful cries could still be heard from afar. Hurt, really hurt. Although the attack just now was not enough to kill it, it was enough to hurt its bones. It would not be able to recover in a short period of time. Taking advantage of the short gap in the battle, the roarer frantically absorbed earth elements from under its feet and compressed them into solid rocks to repair its damaged body. Grimm also shot a few lava fireballs in succession, blasting the area around the cave into a sea of fire, buying as much time as possible for the roarer to repair itself. However, the next wave of attack came quickly. This time, it was no longer a self-destructive flying attack. Instead, two adult manticores flapped their bat wings, swung away the flames, and clawed at the smooth stone walls to attack the roarer. Due to the limited space at the cave entrance, they could not move as quickly as they usually did. However, with their sharp claws and terrifying fangs, they still posed a great threat. As for the attacks from Grimm and the Decayed One, since they could not dodge, they could only rely on their protective force field and strong physique to withstand the attacks. Under their violent and ferocious attacks, almost as soon as the rock armor on the roarer's body was repaired, it would be riddled with scratches and bites from the monsters again. The roarer's rock body, which was made up of many rocks, was also in a terrible state. Cracks and claw marks were everywhere. The roarer's rock body was made of many rocks, but its front was also in a terrible state. Terrifying cracks and penetrating claw marks were everywhere. Fortunately, the roarer had a good crowd control skill. Every once in a while, it could use Earthquake to interrupt the Manticore's attack rhythm, giving it time to recover. The rock armor that it released could significantly increase its defense, which was why it was able to deal with the chimeras for such a long time. If it were the rotted ones, they probably wouldn't even be able to hold on for 3 to 5 minutes. Even so, when the two chimeras were treated with injuries and were replaced by two new chimeras, the Howler could no longer hold on. The rock it had just condensed was smashed, the rock armor it had summoned was crushed, and even its rock body was riddled with holes. Its core was about to be destroyed. If they allowed the roarers to be destroyed by the chimeras, it would be very difficult to continue blocking the enemy's path. Left with no choice, Grimm ordered Growler to temporarily retreat and focus on its recovery. He strode forward to block the path of the two manticores while his body rapidly expanded. Without hesitation, Grim transformed into the flame demon, but he didn't unseal the flame demon's heart. The appearance of the powerful flame demon was undoubtedly a torture to the two chimeras squeezed at the cave entrance. After transforming into the flame demon, although Grim did not have as much strength and sturdy a body as the Roarer, he still had many defensive spells. His body of flames naturally had the protection of flames, and anyone who attacked him would inevitably be injured by the flames. Outside of his body, there was a lava shield and an energy shield activated by the Einstone. In addition, there was a large area of fire barrier and high-temperature barrier. Even a stone golem standing next to Grim would be roasted to death, let alone a body of flesh and blood. The two chimeras frantically attacked the lava shield while gritting their teeth to endure the continuous burst of lava fireballs from Grim's hands. Their skin was scorched to the point that their flesh was torn apart. The flames, lava, and flames formed a huge furnace, roasting them until they were burnt on the outside and burnt on the inside. It was a miserable sight. They barely managed to break through Grim's lava shield and dig a few wounds on his tall and sturdy body. The two chimeras that were about to be roasted quickly retreated from the battlefield. The one that replaced them was a chimera that was much larger than the average chimera. Even with Grim's strength after transforming into the flame demon, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. His desire to fight suddenly disappeared. The leader of the chimeras, that male elite manticore, in the face of such a powerful guy, Grim did not dare to hide anything at all. The flames around his body once again surged violently, and the heart of the flame demon continued to beat wildly. Waves of pure flame energy flowed through his veins and into his limbs. The color of the flames around Grim's body instantly changed from crimson to dark purple. A pure and evil energy burst out along with the abyss flame. While this flame burned the body, it also had the ability to corrode the soul. It was extremely sinister and terrifying. The leader of the chimeras stood proudly in the sea of flames. Its powerful life force distorted the space around it, protecting it from the poison of the flames. Its majestic lion eyes stared at Grim without blinking. There was deep hatred and confusion in its eyes, but more than that, there was the light of reason unique to intelligent creatures. Human, why do you want to invade our homeland? We have never killed any sorcerers. Territory. Facing an enemy that could stand on equal footing with him, Grim had no choice but to put away his pride as a sorcerer and give the real answer. I need this territory. I need the energy of the volcanoes deep underground. The Chimera leader's eyes darkened. It immediately knew that today's matter would not end well. As an underground monster, the Chimeras could not leave the special environment of the underground world. If they went deeper underground, there were even more terrifying monsters that even the Chimeras did not dare to provoke. If they went to the surface, with the Chimera's strength and slow reproduction, they would not be able to fight against the monsters on the surface. In the end, only the shallow surface of the underground world was suitable for them. If they left this familiar area, they would most likely fall from the middle of the food chain in the Black Forest to the lower reaches. At that time, they would no longer be leisurely hunting others. Instead, they would have to hide from other monsters. Therefore, the importance of this nest to the Chimeras was self-evident. The only way to make them give up this place was to step over their corpses. Instantly understanding the situation, the Chimera leader no longer had any hopes of negotiating or making a deal. With a furious roar, the Chimera leader pounced on the tall flame demon that Grim had transformed into. Grim did not show any weakness and pounced on the flame demon. But before he pounced, he had already swallowed a bottle of magic potion. This was a potion that Gargamel had specially made to counter the paralysis poison of the Chimeras. Before the two sides collided, Grim pushed his hands forward and a huge pillar of fire that was 1 meter thick violently rushed towards the Chimera leader. Relying on the life force outside its body, the Chimera leader broke through the flames and rushed in front of Grim. Whoosh whoosh, the violent claws of the Chimera leader brought along a cold wind and left deep scratches on the lava shield in front of Grim. The long and elegant mane on the chest of the Chimera leader was swept by the terrifying flames and was instantly burnt to a bald spot. Taking advantage of the deadlock, the Chimera leader's long scorpion tail suddenly pierced out. The sharp, hook-like poison stinger at the end of its appendages obviously had some kind of armor-piercing effect. It actually broke through the defense of the lava shield and pierced deep into the flame demon's body. A roar! The two opponents let out painful groans at the same time. Grim felt a pain in his shoulder and then became numb. Then he felt nothing. The terrifying paralysis poison had the ability to paralyze the soul and consciousness. Grim immediately felt that his body was no longer under his control. Although it was very slight, it was real. The Chimera leader's painful howls came from the damage caused by the flames on the stinger. It felt as if it had inserted its scorpion tail into the terrifying lava of an extremely hot volcano. Its scorpion tail that was densely covered in spiritual nodes was instantly roasted by the high temperature of the opponent's body. Although it had tried its best to inject the paralysis poison into its body, the opponent did not completely lose the ability to resist like its previous prey, except that its body was slightly stiff. The Chimera leader, on the other hand, was currently being burned by both the sea of lava and the flame barrier. Even with its strength, it could not withstand such terrifying fire damage. Therefore, after struggling with Grim for more than 10 rounds, the Chimera leader took the initiative to retreat and regroup. This retreat revealed just how much damage the two of them had suffered in that short exchange of blows. The lava shield around Grim's flame demon form was completely shattered and his chest was full of cracks. Crimson lava gushed out and formed a small lava lake on the ground. After transforming into a flame demon, this was all Grim's blood. Grim was in a miserable state. The Chimera leader was not much better than him. It was as if it had been thrown into a volcano and bathed in lava. The Chimera leader's body was now badly mutilated by the flames and lava. There was not an inch of undamaged skin on its body. There were yellow blisters and burn marks everywhere. The blood that gushed out was instantly vaporized by the high temperature of the flames before it could even touch the ground. If it was not for its high vitality of 11 points and having the talent Rapid Regeneration, these injuries would have been enough to force it to withdraw from today's battle. Just as the Chimera leader was about to regroup and use its bat wings to launch an even more ferocious attack, Grim did not retreat. Instead, he opened his hand and grabbed the secret scroll of voodoo in his hand. He took the initiative to launch a new round of witchcraft attack on the Chimera leader. Crimson Flame Storm. Molten Core Explosion. Chapter 4:03. If Grim's fire spells were said to have caused the most damage to the manticores, then the poisonous smoke that Gargamel continuously threw into the cave was the most insidious method to force the manticores into a corner. Without Gargamel, today's battle would have been a long one. Grim might have been able to trap the manticores in the cave, but he wouldn't be able to get rid of the manticores quickly. To be honest, the overall strength of the manticores was 2 to 3 times that of Grim's. But there were no ifs in this world. Reasonable tactics, suitable candidates, and strong execution were the keys to this perfect battle where they defeated the enemy with a small number of enemies. When the adult manticores used their strong bodies and fearless will to fight, but they still couldn't get rid of the stones blocking their way, they were doomed to a tragic end. The manticore leader was heavily injured and fled into the depths of the cave, replaced by 2 young manticores. The strongest ones had already retreated with injuries, so they could only let the weaker young manticores attack. Their opponents were the Howler, which had almost fully recovered, and Grim, who had once again retreated to the second line. With a meat shield and a fire shaman, coupled with the Rotting One and Gargamel, the 2 young manticores could no longer replicate their previous bravery. Before they could even get close to the Howler, they were hit by a series of spells and screamed in pain. When they finally got close to the stone golem, a tremor of the earth was enough to kill them. What followed was a torrential spell baptism. The 2 young manticores immediately knelt down. If it wasn't for the manticores behind them biting their tails and dragging them back, they would have died in the narrow cave entrance. At this moment, they couldn't help but curse at Gargamel's treachery. If it wasn't for the poisonous smoke, even if the manticores couldn't get out, they could still block the entrance and fight a protracted battle with Grim. But because of Gargamel's existence, the whole cave was filled with suffocating poisonous smoke. The manticores had no choice but to use their bodies to fight for a way out. Of course, if the manticore leader was a little more vicious and cunning, he would have sent out a few young manticores to fight the Howlers while they were still at their peak to exhaust Grim's forces. Then, the elite manticores would launch a surprise attack, which would increase their chances of breaking out of the encirclement. After all, Grim only had one wizard-level meat shield, Howler, and Grim's half-meat shield. Once the Howler was destroyed, the entire situation would deteriorate to the point where it would be difficult to salvage. After all, things were not as good as they had been in the past. He had lost the Inferno Tyrant, who was a heavy firepower user, and Grim's own strength was barely comparable to that of a veteran sorcerer. If he unsealed the Balrog's heart, he might have the explosive power of an elite wizard for a short period of time, but he only had a short 15 minutes. With such strength, there was still a great risk of being overturned by the enemy. But fortunately, with the interference of many factors, he had relied on the AI, Chip's battlefield simulation, to come up with a strategy that could be considered complete, and he was finally able to take down the group of manticores. The 11 manticores weren't destroyed by Grim's fire magic. Instead, they were all knocked out by the Gargamel's poison mist potion, lying in the cave like a pile of mud. Even the heavily injured elite manticore leader was the same. All the hair on its body had fallen off, and its body was covered with blisters and scabs filled with pus and blood. Terrifying yellow liquid flowed freely, and a pungent stench filled the air. Grim, who had dispelled the poison mist and entered the cave, could not help but feel a little sad when he saw the scene before him. Such a powerful manticore family had been easily taken down by a few people. Now that he thought about it, it was a little strange and unbelievable. However, looking at the pitiful manticores that were as limp as dead dogs, Grim only felt pity for them for a short moment. Immediately after, he loudly ordered Gargamel, "Hurry up and treat them. We can't let them die so easily, or else the loss will be too great." Actually, there was no need for him to say anything. After Gargamel entered the cave, he could not help but laugh out loud at the sight of the manticores that were unable to move. His sinister laughter was as sharp as an owl's, causing one's hair to stand on end. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," Gargamel repeatedly ordered. "Quickly feed them the antidote and tie them up for me." The mercenaries who were only responsible for guarding the outer perimeter swarmed in, each of them using wet cloth to cover their mouths and noses. The pungent smell of medicine could be faintly smelled from the cloth. With their help, those who fed the manticore's potions and those who tied ropes, in the blink of an eye, 11 manticores were tied up tightly, unable to move. Gargamel was not so kind as to completely detoxify them. Without the control of the poison, the manticores would be able to break free from the ropes made of iron string vines with their naturally strong physique. Therefore, Gargamel took out some improved antidotes. Not only did it preserve their lives, but it also prevented them from fully recovering. While at the same time, it also injected some of the terrifying toxins into their lungs so that it would be easier to control later. Such a group of manticores was suitable to be subdued and made into the future guards of the Wizard's Pagoda. Thus, Grim handed the task of subduing the manticores to Gargamel, while he himself dived deep into the ground alone. There he discovered a large group of caves and a lava well. In fact, as soon as he stepped into the cave, Grim could already feel the rich aura of fire elements. The entire group of caves that stretched for 2 to 3 miles was enveloped in a dazzling red light, and the air was filled with a thick, suffocating smell of sulfur. The source of all this came from a lava well with a diameter of 5 meters in the center of the cave. This was a lava well that led straight to the depths of the earth. Looking down from the mouth of the cave, all Grim could see was the churning sea of lava. The mouth of the well was about 50 meters away from the surface of the lava, and the surrounding walls were made of volcanic rock that could resist the invasion of lava. It was also a natural stone used to build the Fire Wizard's Pagoda. Grimm decisively grabbed his wizard staff and jumped into the sea of lava below. With the partial immunity to fire brought by the body of flames, he took a preliminary look at the shallow surface of the sea of lava and was shocked by what he saw. This should be a natural earth lung. Just like how humans needed lungs to breathe, the underground world also needed a channel to communicate with the surface world. The violent volcanic region was one of them, but there were many more similar earth lungs. They were hidden all over the continent, even at the bottom of the endless sea. Through the winding and hidden channels, they could radiate heat from the underground to the surface and then absorb the ubiquitous elemental energy into the depths of the earth. This was obviously a natural earth lung, with fire elements as its main source. The value of its existence to a fire wizard like Yang Ling was obvious. Grimm immediately left a wizard imprint near the lava well, using it as a future location. Only then did he return to the Manticore lair with satisfaction. In the 3 days that Grimm was gone, Gargamel also had a major breakthrough in that aspect. Among the 11 Manticores, 2 of the young Manticores could not withstand the threat of death and medicine, and finally lowered their heads in humiliation. They opened up their souls and allowed Gargamel to plant a soul imprint in them. With both the wizard imprint and the soul imprint, the lives of the 2 young Manticores were completely in Gargamel's hands. With these 2 examples in front of him, the rest of the Manticores chose to surrender one after another, gaining their freedom. As for the 2 elite Manticores, including the Manticore leader, they would rather die than surrender. This undoubtedly infuriated Gargamel. But after Grimm returned, he specifically went to talk to the Manticore leader, and it reluctantly surrendered. There were 2 factors that prompted it to surrender. First, Grimm promised that this was only an employment contract, not a slave contract. This also meant that Grimm would have to pay the Manticore family a regular employment fee, which was temporarily set at 30 magic crystals per month. Second, the offspring of the Manticores would be free. The young Manticores born in the future would no longer be bound by the contract and could live, reproduce, and migrate freely. Wizards would not be allowed to interfere. Grimm naturally agreed to these 2 conditions. Only then did the elite Manticore leader bring its partner to join his party. After the matter with the Manticores was settled, Grimm left Gargamel, the mechanical girl Sabrina, and the potioneering apprentice Daniel in the diseased forest. Only then did he bring the rest of the party back to Pine Tower Town. As for the forest demon Ava, she had been hiding in the dark and did not meet the mercenaries, so the rest of the party did not even know of her existence. This trip to the Black Forest took 27 days. When the adventurer party successfully returned, the whole Pine Tower town was instantly in an uproar. The mercenaries that stayed in the town all rushed to the hotel, asking Lowe and the others about the details of this adventure. However, the members of the party who received Grimm's money all kept their mouths shut, not daring to reveal the information of their employer. Grimm only stayed in Pine Tower Town for a night, and the next day he hurried back to his family. The first thing Grimm did when he returned to his family was to pay a visit to the family's main wizard, Ms. Sinazar, and apply to her to build a personal wizard tower. This was something that the great wizard, Mr. Serbo, had personally promised him after the last planar war, so he made the request with confidence. After not seeing each other for a few days, Ms. Sinazar seemed to be in a very good mood. She readily agreed to Grimm's request and quickly handed over the task to the rank 2 wizard, Forgan. Chapter 404. The various which factions returned the territories, resource points, and manors to Alice one after another. With the few people in the Tower of Destiny, it was impossible to maintain and manage them. Therefore, when the contact of the Serebo family came looking for her, Alice took all the benefits and gave them a lot of benefits. The Serebo family used their connections to manage these territories and resource points for the Witches of Destiny, and they only needed to pay them a certain proportion of resources regularly. This kind of cooperation was a great thing for the Solubo family and Alice, although the witch families only returned small amounts. In the eyes of the mid-ranked wizard family, it was already a huge amount of resources that they could not swallow. In order to get these territories and resource points up and running faster, the Solubo family had no choice but to exchange benefits with some local families. Only then did they barely manage to support the situation. The Solubo family needed these territories and resource points to expand their connections and trade in the north, while Alice needed a group of ready-made laborers to manage the vast territory of the Witches of Destiny for her. Therefore, the two sides hit it off and were in full swing for in-depth cooperation. Over the past few days, Senazar had been busy communicating with the person in charge of the north, discussing specific matters, and working hard to allocate manpower. Although Alice was now a lone leader of the witches, she only had 2 or 3 usable assistants, and she didn't have a single trusted subordinate. Alice was still the leader of the witches. In the central continent, where there were many families, this kind of strength could not even be compared to a small family that had just been established. But a witch leader was a witch leader. According to the authority given to her by the ancient rules, Alice's future resources and territory would be comparable to those of the oldest families in the scattered forest of towers that had tens of thousands of years of history. So if the Solubo family could build a good relationship with her, it would be a huge boost to their family strength. Because of this factor, Senazar looked at Grimm in a different light. Outsiders who did not know the truth might think that Grimm and Alice were just exchanging benefits. But only Senazar, who was involved, knew that the relationship between the two was not simple. Even their status might be completely different for what the outside world expected. Under such circumstances, it was even more impossible for her to deliberately make things difficult for Grimm and ruin their close cooperation. According to the agreement, the Solubo family would be responsible for building a wizard tower in a suitable location for Grimm. According to Grimm's understanding, even the lowest leveled Magus tower with 3 floors would cost a terrifying 200,000 magic crystals. And this obviously did not include the cost of perfecting the internal facilities of the Magus tower. When Grimm arrived at Forgan's residence, he activated a long-distance communication crystal without hesitation. In the next second, a middle-aged sorcerer wearing a luxurious sorcerer robe was projected from the communication crystal. Welcome to the Silver Alliance's Redfini Trading Company. Architect Hani is willing to serve you wholeheartedly. Lord Forgan, how may I be of service? Wizard Honey, this is Wizard Grimm from the Solubo family. He wants to build a private wizard tower, and our family will pay for it. The models will be built according to the most basic universal models. You can discuss the specifics yourselves. With that, Forgan retreated to the side, allowing Grimm to stand in front of the screen. Congratulations, Wizard Grimm, said Wizard Hani with a heartfelt sigh. Thank you. Grimm nodded back. Ordinary Magus families would only build Magus towers near important family territories and resource points to facilitate the maintenance of their rule and management. As for building a personal wizard tower for a wizard, only a portion of the core wizards could enjoy such generous treatment. Even though this wizard tower was the lowest level of basic wizard towers, Grimm had full control over it, unlike the wizards who were stationed in the wizard tower. They only had secondary control, and the core control was still in the hands of his family. As for the benefits of having a personal wizard tower, there was no need to elaborate. That was where a wizard settled down. Many wizards would invest their entire lives into their personal wizard's pagoda, then pass it on to their descendants or beloved disciples as a continuation of their bloodline. In the Solubo family, Wizard Forgan and Wizard Zanaza both had their own private wizard pagoda. Many important or secret experiments would be done there. The wizard tower in Ferdinand City was only the family's public wizard tower. They would only return to the wizard tower at specific times to take care of family affairs. Most of their time was spent in their own wizard towers. Therefore, the family would naturally build a wizard tower for a high-level wizard. As for a level 1 wizard, even a direct descendant like Corgan did not have the right to have his own wizard tower. Of course, if you had the 200,000 magic crystals to build it, you could definitely build it yourself. However, with the normal business methods of wizards, it would take about 60 to 100 years to save up 200,000 magic crystals. Someone like Corgan, who was in a medium-level family, could get a stable income every year by guarding his family territory and resource points. Furthermore, he had a decent ability in modifying wizard beasts, which could bring him some extra income. Even so, he still did not have his own wizard tower. Wizard Grim, I wonder if you've decided on where to build the wizard's pagoda? Hani asked politely. Yes, the coordinates are as follows. Grim immediately reported the coordinates of the disease forest. On the other side of the light screen, Wizard Hani was looking at the map. When he found the location Grim said, he couldn't help but frown. Wizard Grim, are you sure you want to build a wizard tower there? That's within the Black Forest. Although it's only at the edge, there are still unpredictable risks. I'm sure. I'm a fire wizard, and I found a small fire element earth lung there. It's perfect for my future development. Hearing Grim's words, the wizards on both sides of the screen were stunned. They could not help but feel envious of his good luck. There was an earth lung near the wizard tower. The architects naturally had a way to connect it with the energy of the wizard's tower. This way, the wizard's tower's energy supply would be much higher than other wizard towers. Not to mention the fact that this energy point was compatible with the fire element of the owner of the wizard's tower. From now on, Grim's energy recovery and meditation efficiency would be many times better than others. Congratulations, Wizard Grim. Your luck is just too good. Wizard Hani exclaimed from the other side of the screen, but there are some things I need to tell you in advance. A basic wizard tower like this does not have a teleportation spell circle. If you want to build one, you'll need to pay extra magic crystals. Of course, if you're willing to contribute the teleportation spell circle as part of the public teleportation network in the Scattered Tower Forest, the Scattered Tower Forest Wizard Association might be willing to pay for it. How many magic crystals does it cost to build a teleportation spell circle? Grim asked curiously. The most basic price is 100,000 magic crystals. Grim was speechless. Although he already knew how difficult it was to build a wizard's tower, he could not help but be dumbfounded by the price of tens of thousands of magic crystals. Luckily, he was building this wizard's tower to train his mental strength in the future. He did not need to maintain a close connection with the outside world, so it was not a pity to give up on the teleportation spell circle for now. The two of them exchanged some more information and made an agreement before cutting off the connection. Looks like you're the most promising official wizard in the family, Wizard Forgan exclaimed before they parted ways. After all, he was the one who brought Grim into the Cerubo family. Now that he saw Grim improving so quickly, he was extremely emotional. Grim could only thank him profusely. As promised, Grim returned to Pine Tower Town and waited in silence. 2 days later, the 3 wizards from the Redfini trading firm arrived. To be honest, Grim was in awe of the trading firm that the Silver Alliance had stationed in the Scattered Tower Forest. His trip to the Sky City had given him a basic understanding of how powerful the Silver Alliance was. The Sea of War golems was enough to make anyone despair. The Silver Alliance had a monopoly on arcane wizards, and they also had a monopoly on the construction of wizards' towers and teleportation spell circles. Although many large families would nurture their own auxiliary wizards such as spell circle masters, potion masters, alchemists, and magic puppeteers, they still had to rely on these scholar wizards for the core technology. As for those small and medium wizard families and organizations, if they could not nurture their own auxiliary wizards, they would have to spend a huge amount of magic crystals to seek help from the Silver Alliance. The Redfini trading firm was a professional organization that was stationed by the Silver Alliance to build wizards' towers. When the 2 spell circle masters, an architect, and a battle wizard from the Redfini trading firm arrived at Pine Tower Town, Grim was already prepared. Outside of the town, 5 manticores with unique appearances were already waiting. Their existence also made the 3 visitors click their tongues in wonder. It was not unusual to raise magic beasts as guards or transportation tools, but most of them were within the wizard families. Wizard Grimm could easily bring out 5 wizard-level manticores as transportation tools to go deep into the Black Forest. Without a doubt, he had quite a bit of influence in this area. Of course, the scars on the manticores had not completely disappeared, which meant they had just been tamed not long ago. Chapter 405. A distance of 300 miles was nothing to a wizard. If they were not in the Black Forest, it would only take them 2 to 3 hours to reach the place. However, the Black Forest had its own rules. If they wanted to fly freely here, they wouldn't be able to survive even if they had 10 lives. Most of the powerful monsters would not bother with those who sneaked past their territory, but if you flew over their heads, it would be a blatant provocation. The 5 manticores were undoubtedly the local monsters in this area, so they were very familiar with the hunting areas of the monsters along the way. They did not fly high. Instead, they flew close to the branches of the tall, ancient trees, twisting and turning along the way, trying their best to quickly pass through the territory of the powerful monsters. Therefore, they managed to cross the 300 miles of forest without any mishaps, and once again returned to the diseased forest, which had a more distinctive topography. And this was the territory of the Manticore family. Without stopping on the ground, the 5 chimeras flapped their bat wings and charged into the cave with their majestic bodies. The tens of thousands of nocturnal bats that were resting in the cave screeched in fear and flew in all directions. However, no matter how panicked these bats were, none of them dared to come within 10 meters of the manticores. In this area, the manticores were the undisputed kings. The chimeras did not pay any attention to this group of free watchdogs at all. Flapping their bat wings, they glided quickly in the karst cave, nimbly dodging the towering stone pillars and hanging stalactites one after another, before diving into the dark and deep passage in the corner. They glided in the narrow and dark tunnel, and when they encountered an area that was too narrow, they would retract their wings and run quickly on the ground like real lions. When the space was a little wider, they would once again spread their wings and dash through the jagged stone pillars and caves. This was their home. They were extremely familiar with every passageway and every stone pillar here. Even though the underground was dim, the manticores had low light vision, so it did not affect them at all. They were like little fish swimming in coral reefs, moving nimbly between rocks, and mud. They passed through the complicated underground tunnels and arrived at the karst caves where Grimm had discovered the lava well. As soon as they entered, the space around them suddenly became spacious, even spacious. The 3 magi of the Silver Alliance, who had been sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed, could not help but open their eyes and scan their surroundings. In particular, the lava well in the center of the cave group attracted the attention of the 2 arcane sorcerers. As soon as they jumped off the manticore, they hurriedly approached the lava well. They took out their strange sorcery tools and started to measure the environmental data. The guy named Eugene was a combat sorcerer, and his main responsibility was to protect the 2 arcane sorcerers who were out on a mission. Therefore, he was not confused by the environment. He nodded at Grimm and began to walk around the lava well. Seeing the 2 arcane sorcerers busying themselves as soon as they arrived, Grimm couldn't help but cough awkwardly. However, this did not disturb the 2 arcane sorcerers who were obviously immersed in their work. Instead, it attracted Eugene, who was wandering around back. "What? Do you need something else?" Wizard Eugene's tone was rather cold, and the surging energy on his body had a murderous aura. I just wanted to ask, is there anything else I can help you with regarding the construction of the Wizard Tower?" "We don't need any help," Wizard Eugene retorted. "If you really have the ability, you don't need to invite us here. Everything here is good. It's a suitable place to build the Wizard Tower." "Then what do I need to do?" "You don't need to do anything, just leave. A small foundational wizard pagoda like this would only take 9 days to complete. When everything is finished, I will naturally inform you, and you will be in charge of the blood sacrifice of the Tower Genie." "All right, you can leave now." At this moment, Grimm's jaw almost dropped to the ground by Eugene's arrogance. However, when he thought about the Silver Alliance's style, he felt relieved. This was a unique business to begin with. After they monopolized most of the arcane sorcerers and related knowledge, other sorcerer families and organizations could only rely on the Silver Alliance if they wanted to quickly complete the construction of the Wizard Tower. The Cerubo family also had their own architects and spell formation masters, but these strategists stayed in the outer regions, firmly controlled by the great wizard Cerubo. Even the level 3 wizard Sanazar could not make the decision for them to cross the dimensional barrier and return to the sorcerer world to build a simple wizard tower for a mere level 1 wizard. This was because the arcane sorcerers that the Cerubo family had painstakingly nurtured were all prepared for the dimensional war. No one could make them work for an ordinary family sorcerer. So, something like building a personal wizard tower for Grimm could only be done by a specialized organization like the Silver Alliance. Thus, not even 15 minutes after inviting this group of people, Grimm was politely escorted out of the cave by Wizard Eugene. It could be seen that this group of people was very protective of intellectual property and technology. Even when Grimm left the cave, he could still feel that he was being watched. Only when he returned to the Chimera's lair did the feeling of being watched completely disappear. "Don't be upset, Master." Gargamel, who had been hiding underground for the past few days, heard the news and rushed over, comforting him in a low voice. "All the people from the 3 great factions are like this. You'll get used to it after coming into contact with them more." "Oh, you know about the 3 great factions?" Grimm asked curiously. "Can you tell me about them?" "Kiki, what's there to say?" Gargamel's skinny old face showed a look of hatred. The pain of being a wandering sorcerer is hard to understand if you haven't experienced it yourself. We're like rats on the street, bullied by the local sorcerer families wherever we go. In order to collect knowledge and buy materials, we can only pinch our noses and suck up to the managers of the public wizard towers. Only then can we get some cheaper resources. Then why don't you join some sorcerer families? With your qualifications as a potion master, as long as you show that you're willing to join them, even those mid-level sorcerer families will welcome you with open arms. Why would you want to wander around and live a miserable life of being looked down upon by others? Master, your words show that you don't really understand the sorcerer families. When you join these families as an arcane sorcerer, you'll find that they really value your existence and are willing to invest a lot of resources into you. But, from then on, you'll forever lose your freedom. Freedom? Yes, freedom. Gargamel sighed. They've invested resources into you, so naturally they want to get more out of you. As a potion master, after joining a sorcerer family, I have to hand over a certain amount of wizard potions every year. For people like me, who have no power or influence, they will set a very specific amount of wizard potions. If I want to complete my mission, I can only spend every day in a laboratory filled with strange smells, doing repetitive and boring work day and night. Grimm silently rubbed his chin and became silent. And the most direct consequence of this is, I simply don't have that much time to meditate, and I don't have the time to improve my strength. After I became a sorcerer, I spent a lot of time every year on pointless concocting wizard potions. And just like that, my body is being destroyed bit by bit. Gargamel was currently only 89 years old, which was not even considered middle-aged among the sorcerers who were 200 to 300 years old. But his body and appearance were already comparable to those old sorcerers who were nearing the end of their lives. Aren't there many high-grade sorcerers among the arcane sorcerers? Grimm was a little confused. Master, are you talking about the Silver Alliance? Gargamel chuckled coldly. For such a large organization to be willing to spend resources to become a high-grade sorcerer, those who are willing to spend resources to become a high-grade sorcerer are all direct descendants with a family background. For outsiders, they're never willing to do so. After all, the amount of resources needed to raise an untalented arcane sorcerer to Grade 2 is enough to create 2 or 3 Grade 2 combat sorcerers. So if it's not one of them, they are also reluctant. Grimm understood this point very well. In the Cerubo family, Winley was a potion master, and Kogan was a wizard beast trainer. They both had their own unique support abilities. But to be honest, Grimm had always looked down on their combat abilities. Compared to Grimm, their improvement in strength was like a tortoise crawling. After returning from the Knight's Plane, Grimm could only see them 3 or 4 times a year, which was already enough. For the rest of the time, they would spend in their respective laboratories, only coming out once every 10 days or half a month. There were even many times when they could not afford to eat or drink and could only rely on nutrition pills to support themselves. Without training for a long period of time, their bodies were exposed to all kinds of harmful materials, and their minds were not nourished for a long period of time. Instead of improving, they would deteriorate and become withered. It would be surprising if their strength did not deteriorate. But compared to the decline in strength, what was even more unbearable was the loss of freedom. As a professional sorcerer that was carefully trained by the family, they would no longer be able to travel and explore. No family would allow an arcane sorcerer to team up with strangers to play jungle adventures just for a little bit of insignificant combat experience and adventure experience. Even if there was a need, the family would send out a large number of experts to protect the arcane sorcerer and explore the so-called ruins and dangerous places with low risk. With such experiences, the chances of an arcane sorcerer getting to train and sharpen was almost zero. From this, Grimm finally understood why Gargamel would rather become a wandering sorcerer than join a sorcerer family. Chapter 406. The 3 major sorcerer forces, the Northern Witches of the North Coast, the Silver Alliance of the West Coast, and the Sorcerer Association of the East Coast. They each had their own knowledge and cultural traditions, and displayed a high degree of monopoly and xenophobia. When it came to the Northern Witches, everyone recognized that they were fierce, especially fierce. Without this fierce aura, how could a group of witches open up such a large territory in the north, where there was nothing, and let the witches' legacy not be cut off after tens of thousands of years? Relying on this fierceness, they forced back the monsters in the Black Forest and fought with them inch by inch for the precious land. The reason why the people of the North trusted these witches so much was because the Northern Witches opened their arms, and with courage far exceeding that of the sorcerers, they blocked the terrifying monster tide and the invasion of the terrible monsters. The witches were the true guardians of the North. In contrast, the Silver Alliance was more like a miscellaneous army. Its higher-ups were not as good at fighting as the Northern Witches, but they were good at controlling and monopolizing technology. They had floating fortresses, teleportation spell formations, magic puppet armies, large quantities of scrolls, potions, magic wands. These were all rare resources and daily consumables that the sorcerers couldn't do without. Monopolizing these also allowed them to earn a huge amount of resources and magic crystals. Therefore, many people saw the Silver Alliance as a super large commercial organization and extremely despised their identity as sorcerers. As for the Wizard Association of the East Coast, it was a completely orthodox, large-scale sorcerer organization. Their biggest characteristic was the completeness and comprehensiveness of their knowledge system, as well as making the best use of the sorcerer's talents. In the central part of the continent, in the scattered forest of towers, the conquest and development of the Outer Realms' secondary planes were carried out in the form of families. The consumption of manpower and resources in the early stage of the Planar War was borne by individual families, while the development and resource recovery in the middle and later stages were the cornerstone of the family's continued advancement. But in the Wizard Association, the conquest of the planes was completely led by individual sorcerers. There were many explorers in the Wizard Association. Their individual combat power might not be very strong, but they were extremely proficient in void exploration and plane search. They wandered in the depths of the endless starry sky, exploring one dangerous area after another. Every time they found an unoccupied secondary plane, they would put the plane's coordinates up for sale in the association. The powerful wizards in the association took turns to bid, and the highest bidder won. The wizard who had obtained the coordinates of the plane was responsible for recruiting a suitable team of wizards to break through the plane barrier and establish a stable outpost camp in the secondary plane. Once the teleportation spell formation was completed, the Magus Association could take over the rest. The subsequent conquest, occupation, and exploitation of resources would be handled by the professional magi of the Magus Association. The magi who had successfully taken down the outpost only needed to wait for the resources to be harvested. Therefore, the Wizard Association was the one who maintained the ruling position in the secondary planes that they occupied, and the many wizards were just hired thugs. Just like that, some of the more powerful magi were freed from the complicated process of plane occupation, purging, and ruling. They used war to seize resources to strengthen themselves, and then used their powerful strength to conquer more planes. This was a sustainable development model chosen by the Sorcerer Association. Therefore, considering the strength of the three Magus organizations, the strongest was undoubtedly the Sorcerer Association, followed by the Silver Alliance and the Northern Witches. However, if there was a conflict between magi in a small area, judging from their combat power, the Northern Witches were the strongest, the Sorcerer Association second, and the Silver Alliance magi the weakest. This was the current power structure of the entire Magus world. As for the scattered forest towers in the middle of the continent, it occupied the most population and land resources. In the end, it was just a loose alliance of Magus families. On the surface, it seemed to have the most magi, the most people under its jurisdiction, and the most land resources, but its strength was not even worth mentioning. The only reason why it had not been taken over by the three major organizations was because they were afraid that their rash actions would incite the other two organizations to join forces. Therefore, although the three organizations were working hard to expand their influence in the scattered forest towers, they were unable to make a breakthrough due to the extreme xenophobia of the local Magus families. Although the old men of the Scattered Forest Towers Association fought fiercely for power, they were very united when there were signs of the three major organizations interfering in the central region. They would rather kill than let any Magus family in the Scattered Forest Tower side with one of the three major organizations. All the families in the central region that were secretly infiltrated by the three major organizations will be silently defeated in a family war. There were no exceptions. In any case, he had a lot of time, so Grimm pulled Gargamel over to chat. Although he had a good understanding of the three major organizations through books and actual contact, chatting with Gargamel still benefited him greatly. However, chatting with Gargamel was still very beneficial to him, and he was able to understand many of the secrets that everyone knew. Of course, in his free time, Grimm could not help but wonder how the two magi of the Silver Alliance would build a Magus Tower. After all, back in the Ninth Dimension, the Salubo family had sent over 20 to 30 of their family's elites to barely build a model of the War Wizard's Tower in a month. Moreover, the Silver Alliance had only sent 2 magi. This was unbelievable to Grimm. Furthermore, the amount of stone, special metals, and magical gems needed to build a wizard's tower was also terrifying. Could the 2 magi have brought all of them with them? Of course, with the area that Grimm had chosen, the volcanic rocks there could be used locally, which would save him a lot of stone. Even so, it was still a huge amount of work. Even if the 2 magi did not sleep for 9 days, they would not be able to complete such a difficult task. The more he thought about it, the more incredulous he felt. However, Grimm could guess that they must have brought along many special magic statues used to build the tower. That was the only way to solve the problem of labor shortage. But what about the etching of runes? If he wanted to turn the wizard's tower into a wizard facility completely controlled by the magi, he would have to etch runes with different functions on every stone in the wizard's tower. Strengthening runes, magic resistance runes, anti-prophecy runes. Not a single one of these could be left out. Then, he had to sketch out the magical energy circuits and energy nodes throughout the tower, as well as add the necessary rune spell formations. The huge amount of work was enough to make one collapse. Could a single wizard complete this? It couldn't be that the Silver Alliance had developed some kind of magic statue that could automatically etch magical energy circuits and rune spell formations, right? It did not seem plausible at all. But as Grimm was making wild guesses, the 9 days quickly passed. Finally, the wizard called Eugene stepped out of the cave and sent a message to Grimm. Grimm led Gargamel and Sabrina and rushed into the underground cave. A dark red tower stood silently in the center of the cave group. The body of the tower was made from a large amount of volcanic rocks. Coupled with the abundant fire element energy within, the entire wizard's tower was glowing red. If Grimm's guess was correct, the well of lava he had discovered had become a part of the foundation of the wizard's tower, and the energy chamber of the wizard's tower was connected to the sea of lava below. This also meant that the tower would never run out of energy. At the very least, it would never run out of fire element energy. As Grimm approached the wizard's tower, a pair of golden doors at the bottom of the wizard's tower slowly opened. 3 wizards of the Silver Alliance were waiting for Grimm inside. In the hands of the spell formation master was a strange crystal that shone with a dazzling light. This is the control crystal for the core spell formation of the wizard's pagoda. You need to use it to activate the rune spell formation of the entire wizard's pagoda. Only then will the wizard's pagoda be truly opened. Alright, you can enter alone to complete the soul validation. A hint of excitement appeared on Grimm's handsome face. He nodded silently and took the strange crystal. There seemed to be a strange magical energy flowing within the sturdy, cold, transparent crystal. Grimm raised the crystal and studied it for a moment, then nodded at the 3 of them before slowly walking into the wizard's pagoda alone. There were 5 levels to the wizard's pagoda. The first thing he saw upon entering was a giant wizard hall. This would be the main public venue for wizard apprentices in the future. In the future, this place might be packed with people and have all sorts of wizard facilities, but now it was just an empty hall. In addition, Grimm saw a small library on the left of the hall and the acolytes' residences on the right. There was a row of small stone rooms, and the furnishings in the rooms were all gone. The spiral staircase leading to the upper level was in the corner of the hall. As it had not been carefully polished, the simple stone steps and walls looked crude and crude. When Grimm held the control crystal in his hand, the internal structure of the wizard's pagoda was completely projected into his mind. However, the elemental altar in the energy room had not been unsealed, and the core spell formation of the wizard's pagoda had not taken over the smaller spell formations scattered around the body of the wizard's pagoda. As such, the entire wizard's pagoda was still in a dormant state, unable to respond to Grimm's commands. As he stepped onto the spiral staircase, a few unique wizard incantations and rune hand gestures were projected in front of Grimm. Only by chanting the incantations with the hand gestures would a temporary tunnel leading to the storage of resources in the first underground level and the energy room in the second underground level be opened. Otherwise, the spiral staircase would only lead to the second underground level. This also meant that anyone without the control rights would not be able to get close to the storage of resources in the energy room. Chapter 407. According to the display in the control crystal, the 4th level of the wizard's pagoda was where the core wizard formation was located. The wizard's pagoda had 5 levels above ground and 2 underground, making it a total of 7 levels. The 2 underground levels were the energy room and the resource warehouse, which was the common layout of most wizard's pagodas. The 1st level above ground was where the acolytes lived, the wizard hall, the library, the academic hall, and the public dining hall. The 2nd level above ground was where the wizard garden, the breeding room, the small laboratory, and the wizard training field were. The 3rd level above ground was where the sealing room, the library, the magic statue factory, the alchemy laboratory, and the scroll creation room were. The 4th level above ground was where the wizards in the wizard's pagoda lived, including their bedrooms, study rooms, guest rooms, and the area where the core wizard formation was located. The 5th level above ground was where the teleportation room, the private laboratory, and the workshop were located. This layout was completed at Grimm's request. Most of the wizard facilities were just empty frames, and they had to be continuously replenished if they wanted to operate perfectly. Under normal circumstances, acolytes could only move around on the 1st and 2nd level. prospective wizards and high-level acolytes could use some of the facilities on the third level after applying. As for the fourth level and above, only wizards could enter, and they had to be trustworthy wizards who belonged to the wizard tower. Wizards from outside could only stay temporarily on the third level. As the wizard's pagoda had not been expanded, the activity area was not too big. However, it was not a problem for 100 wizards and acolytes to live there. Grimm strolled into the spacious and bright central control hall. The clean, white, and translucent stone floor and walls were faintly emitting a dense elemental aura. A huge, strange crystal was embedded in the center of the floor spell formation. At the core of this huge crystal cluster, there was a strange rune that floated up and down, flickering and flickering. It was constantly releasing strange magic energy from within. Grimm bent down to take a closer look, mainly using the AI chip to quickly scan the internal structure of the crystal. Strangely, he found nothing. Beep. Discovered unknown energy crystal. Unable to find any matching material in the database, and no signs of artificial synthesis. Initial speculation. Foreign material. Foreign material? This meant that this crystal was not a specialty of the Magus world, nor was it a mutated crystal created by high-ranked magi using spells. Instead, it was a special crystal that was plundered from another plane or the depths of the Sea of Stars. Grimm then took out the crystal that the silver-robed wizard had given him. It was made of the same material as this giant crystal. Furthermore, when the runes in the huge crystal flashed, the small crystal in his hand would also vibrate and move rhythmically, as if the two crystals were breathing in sync. Grimm followed the silver-cloaked wizard's instructions and placed the crystal in a groove on top of the giant crystal. He then cut his palm and pressed his bleeding hand on top of the crystal. Beep. Data connection channel detected. Do you want to establish connection? Create. As his mental energy connected with the giant crystal, Grimm felt that his world of perception had suddenly become immensely large. His mental energy had almost instantly spread to every corner of the wizard's pagoda. And in his spiritual space, a huge light screen suddenly popped out, densely packed with operation instructions. At this moment, the most urgent command was, activate the wizard's pagoda. This was different from activating the wizard's pagoda. Activating the wizard's pagoda meant that Grimm had obtained the highest level of authority in the entire wizard's pagoda. Unless he went through a special ritual and willingly wiped away the soul imprint left in the crystal, he would forever have the highest level of authority in the wizard's pagoda. AI. Chip, have you discovered any security issues? Beep. Preliminary inspection of the control crystal has been completed. No backdoors or security traps have been discovered. A more comprehensive inspection will be carried out after the wizard's pagoda is activated. I suggest that the host immediately activate the wizard's pagoda. As Grimm heavily tapped on the button to activate the wizard's pagoda, the small wizard's pagoda trembled slightly. In the energy room in the second level underground, the elemental altar suddenly lit up with a holy elemental light. A fist-sized black hole slowly opened up above the elemental altar, and wisps of colorful fog floated out of it. As soon as the fog floated out of the black hole, it was pulled down by the elemental pool below. In less than a quarter of an hour, the dense aura of magical energy assaulted Grimm's senses. The colorful fog gathered more and more, surrounding the bottom of the elemental pool and causing it to become slightly moist. Soon, a pool of clear, translucent, but extremely thick and viscous water appeared at the bottom of the pool. This was not water extracted from the water elemental world, but liquid magical elements that came from the surrounding void. This magical energy was originally in a gaseous form, but under the effects of the elemental pool's precipitation and compression, its unit density was too high, which was why it was in this liquid form. If the energy room of the wizard's pagoda operated for a longer period of time, the liquid magical elements would be further compressed by the elemental pool, forming a solid magical energy crystal. That was the most widely used currency in the wizard world. As the energy room was activated and the magical elements in the elemental pool gathered, waves of magical energy were extracted and slowly injected into the system of the wizard's pagoda, from a second level underground to the first level underground, and then to the outer walls of the wizard's pagoda. All the places where the runic wizard spell formations extended began to glow with fluorescent energy. The three wizards of the Silver Alliance and the Gargamel, who were standing half a mile outside the pagoda, silently watched as a fluorescent light appeared from the bottom of the base of the pagoda, then slowly spread to every corner of the pagoda. The wizard's pagoda, which had been dark red a moment ago, was now as resplendent as a beautiful fiery coral, displaying its beauty and wonder to the crowd. "Please come in, and welcome to my wizard's pagoda." Grimm's joyful and excited voice suddenly came from the air. As soon as his voice fell, the door of the wizard's pagoda that had been sealed just a moment ago opened silently again. Grimm once again met up with the three wizards of the Silver Alliance in the guest hall on the third level of the wizard's pagoda. Gargamel, who had been given partial authority by Grimm, could not help but wander around the place, familiarizing himself with the wizard's pagoda. "Sir Grimm, if you don't have any new requests, we'll be taking our leave." Wizard Eugene was still the one in charge of the coordination. It was obvious that the area was sparsely populated and lacking in resources. The three wizards of the Silver Alliance, who were used to living like princes, could not help but want to leave after completing their mission. They did not want to stay a second longer. "There's no rush." Grimm quickly tried to persuade them to stay. "The basic framework of the wizard's pagoda has been set up, but there are still many facilities that cannot be used. I'd like to know the price of these facilities." Wizard Eugene was straightforward. He immediately took out a piece of parchment and gave Grimm a simple understanding of the basic prices of most of the facilities. Teleportation spell formation, 100,000 magic crystals. Exploration room, 70,000 magic crystals. High-level wizard training room, 80,000 magic crystals. Binding room, small for 1,000 magic crystals. Medium, 20,000 magic crystals. Large, 50,000 magic crystals. Sealing room, 30,000 magic crystals. Purification pool, 20,000 magic crystals. Large-scale comprehensive alchemy laboratory, 130,000 magic crystals. Includes a full set of equipment and tools. Magic statue factory, 40,000 magic crystals. Can only create or repair wizard-level magic statues. Scroll-making room, 3,000 magic crystals. Includes all tools. Enchantment laboratory, 7,000 magic crystals. Alchemy servants, wizard level, 20,000 magic crystals. Apprentice, 800 magic crystals. Modified wizard beasts, wizard level, 10,000 magic crystals. Apprentice, 600 magic crystals. Sorcerer's garden servants, flower fairies, 200 magic crystals. Fairies, 170 magic crystals. Wizard's pagoda slaves, power-type bullmen, 20 magical crystals per person. Boarmen, 8 magical crystals per person. Ogres, 25 magical crystals per person. Half-dragons, 40 magical crystals per person. Wizard's pagoda slaves, special type, halfling gourmet, 300 magical crystals/piece. Underground dwarf blacksmith, 120 magical crystals/piece. Grass elf, 700 magical crystals/piece for female. 600 magical crystals/piece for male. Siren apprentice, 1,700 magical crystals/piece. Even though the parchment was not big, there was a lot of information on it. Many of them were necessary for a functioning wizard's pagoda. However, Grimm could not help but feel a headache when he saw the basic price of each item. If he were an old wizard who had lived for more than 100 years, he would definitely have some capital in his hands. But he was not. He was just an ordinary wizard who had come out empty-handed. He had even just taken off the hat of a new wizard. As for his savings, he had already spent the resources and magic crystals he had obtained from the last dimensional war on Alice's Battle of Fate. He estimated that he could only squeeze out 30,000 to 40,000 magic crystals, which was obviously not enough to complete the Wizard Tower. It was only enough to maintain its basic operations. Of course, it wasn't like Grimm didn't have anything valuable in his hands. As long as he was willing to take out the last piece of void stone, all his problems would be solved. But he really did not want to. Grimm and Wizard Eugene discussed for a long time and built a small flame altar in the hall on the first floor with his own money. They also bought some tools and equipment for the alchemy laboratory, golem factory, and scroll-making room. They also bought some magic seeds for the sorcerer's garden. Apart from these basic facilities, Grimm also bought 2 halfling gourmets, 2 dwarf blacksmiths, and 2 fairies. He had no choice. He and Gargamel would have to stay here for a long time. They could not go out hunting every day. That was why they had to go out and buy large amounts of food and daily necessities, then hand them over to the slaves of other races. As for the guards of the Wizard's Pagoda, there were 11 chimeras. Once the Silver Alliance's magi were done with the flame altar, Grimm immediately inserted the abandoned flame Lord's scepter into it. That way, he could summon 5 fire elementals from the flame altar every day as elemental servants of the Wizard's Pagoda. Chapter 408. He had been pleased to see Alice controlling a Wizard's Pagoda all by herself in the north. But today, when Grimm truly controlled a Wizard's Pagoda, he finally understood how difficult it was to be a tower master. Back when he was living with the Cerubo family, he did not have much need for resources. Coupled with the fact that he was constantly on the move, he did not have much free time to accumulate resources. Now that he was holding a Wizard's Pagoda in his hands, just the consumption of magical crystals and resources was enough to give him a headache. Even though Alice was also alone and working with nothing, the Destiny Witches had a deep foundation. Her starting point was much higher than Grimm's, and as time passed, the gap between their abilities would only grow wider. This was what Grimm was most worried about. Grimm was deeply fascinated by the massive amount of resources that came with his first dimension conquest. He had fantasized more than once about leading his wizard army into an expedition to another world, obtaining vast lands and rich resources, then allowing his team to grow stronger. But in all his fantasies, he would always be the commander, and only he would be the one. But once Alice's subordinates surpassed his own, who would be the commander even if they formed an alliance? Who would be the follower? This question seemed simple, but it troubled Grimm. When things developed to that point, it was not something that could be covered up by the vague feelings between him and Alice. Furthermore, wizards were extremely realistic creatures. Simple feelings between a man and a woman would not be able to overcome the difference in power and status between the two. Alice was the leader of the Destiny Witches, while Grimm was just a small fire wizard with a few subordinates. At that time, what would Grimm use to keep Alice in the position of a follower? Alice and Grimm each had a Wizard's Pagoda. Alice had the Origin Wizard's Pagoda of the Destiny Witches, one of the top Wizard's Pagodas in the Wizard Continent. Even though she had nothing now, as long as she held onto her identity as a Destiny Witch, development would not be a problem. In fact, she was not even starting from scratch. She was just slowly restoring the strength of the Destiny Witches to a level that was worthy of its reputation. She was like a Ms. Perfect, and Grimm was the one who had started from scratch. Of course, Grimm could easily contact Alice in the North and ask her for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of magical crystals. In this way, the financial problems of a small wizard's pagoda would be easily solved. However, as a wizard with great ambitions, Grimm could not bring himself to ask Alice for help. After all, he understood Alice's difficulties very well. Even though the Tower of Destiny had a large number of magical crystal reserves, in order to rope in the few magical elves, they couldn't use the majority of the magical crystals, and the remaining magical crystals were insufficient to support the massive wizard's pagoda. It was difficult here, but it was not as dangerous as Alice's. The problems left behind by the first Destiny Witch, as well as the attitude of the other witch leaders toward her, as well as the internal affairs of the wizard pagoda, if he didn't handle any of them well, he would be crushed to death. To tell the truth, Alice's thin shoulders were no less burdensome than Grimm's had to carry. Most of the time, Grim was secretly glad that he was not in a tricky situation where he could not distinguish between friend and foe. The three wizards of the Silver Alliance left that night, and the slaves Grim bought would arrive in half a month. This also meant that Grim still had half a month to smooth out the order in the Wizard's Pagoda. At the very least, it would be able to operate successfully. Other than the Wizard's spell facilities, the Wizard's Pagoda also lacked basic daily necessities for wizards and apprentices. Moreover, it would be quite a headache to fill them all up. After all, Grim could not sleep on a hard stone bed every day, gnaw on the game caught by the chimeras, and drink water summoned from the water elemental realm. It would be fine if he lived like this for a day or two, but even the most hard-working wizard would not be able to take it if he lived like this for a long time. Just as Grim was silently calculating, he unexpectedly received a message from the gnome cabbie. A dozen of them had arrived at Pine Tower Town and were hiring a team to head to the Wizard's Pagoda. Grim was slightly stunned when he heard the message. He thought for a moment, then handed the Wizard's Pagoda to Gargamel to manage. He immediately led the 11 chimeras he had just subdued and rushed to Pine Tower Town. Half a day later, Grim used the subtle mental connection between him and Cabbie to meet them about 40 miles away from the town. There were 16 people in the team, and the one leading the way was Loa's team that he had hired last time. When Grim lightly jumped off the back of the majestic chimera leader, his black pupils slowly swept across the team. Other than the gnome cabbie and his apprentices, he also saw Meryl in the team. Meryl, why are you here as well? Standing on a patch of soft grass, Meryl looked at the strange lion-like magical creature that was slowly descending while flapping its huge bat wings. Her eyes were filled with admiration and envy. Teacher, you're just too amazing. You've only been here for a few days, and you've already subdued such a powerful creature. Grim was wearing a simple gray wizard robe. He was tall and muscular, with a handsome face. His dark red hair fell over his shoulders, and he held a mysterious wizard staff with red patterns on a black base in his hand. When he stood in front of them like a mountain, he always gave people a feeling that he was as stable as Mount Tai. All right, we'll talk about this when we reach the Wizard's Pagoda. I brought a chimera to give you a ride. Let's go. Naturally, Loa's team of 3 went back the way they came. Meanwhile, the 11 manticore camels carrying 14 people slowly flapped their bat wings and rose into the air. After raising their necks and letting out a long neigh, they quickly flew into the depths of the Black Forest. In order to save space, Grim grabbed Cabbie and rode on a chimera with him. He also asked them why they had come here. Master, of course we're here to deliver things to you. The gnome cabbie explained excitedly. Your Wizard's Pagoda has just been built, and you're definitely lacking in necessities. That's why I went to look for Lady Meryl and brought your disciples and apprentices to deliver these things. Cabbie's large and eye-catching ears were blown to the back by the howling wind. The tuft of green hair on his head was also scraped into the shape of an airplane's head. But even so, it didn't stop it from gesticulating and spitting saliva everywhere to express itself. But towards the end, Cabbie stealthily approached Grim and whispered, Master, apart from the basic necessities, I've also brought you a batch of mana crystals. The gnome shop has been doing well recently, and I've taken the opportunity to make a killing. This is a good opportunity for you to show off your skills. Magical crystals? How much? Grim asked in confusion. 120,000 magical crystals. Cabbie exclaimed in excitement. If it wasn't for Grim's timely pull, it would have fallen off the manticore's back in excitement. 120,000? A playful smile appeared on Grim's face, and he did not respond to Cabbie's words. He was not a greenhorn. How could a small gnome shop under his family's jurisdiction save up 120,000 magical crystals in less than 10 years? This kind of legendary story was fine to listen to, but it definitely could not be taken seriously. Grim could only shake his head and laugh, no longer thinking about it. Instead, he quietly enjoyed the beautiful scenery below him with the other sorcerer apprentices. As the chimeras flew along the undulating sea of trees and the rugged mountain terrain, The birds and beasts in the dense forest below them were full of life. Looking down from above, all one could see was an endless canopy of trees. Perhaps black was the only color in this forest. The forest was deep and serene, and the ancient trees towered into the sky. Within the dense forest, the sky was cut by the branches of the tall trees into strands of blue silk. Mottled specks of light scattered down, blinking mysteriously as the leaves swayed. The dark forest stretched on endlessly, from the low shrubs to the towering giant trees. It was like a paradise for plants. Iron oaks, fir, spruce, cedar, and all kinds of tall trees rose straight up. Below them, all kinds of unknown shrubs and vines were tightly entangled in the gaps between the trees. Any outsider would find it difficult to walk in such a boundless and simple primeval forest. Of course, in such an environment, all kinds of wild beasts were indispensable. However, they were not the masters of the Black Forest. The only ones who could show off were the countless terrifying monsters and all kinds of strange creatures. Those who could follow Wizard Merrill here were either quasi-wizards or high-level apprentices. They had all gone to the edge of the Black Forest and fought with the beasts, monsters, and polluters there. Some returned victorious and obtained the resources and spoils of war they wanted, and some retreated in fear, silently praying that they would not be discovered by monsters in the stinking swamp or rotten shrubs. If an apprentice wanted to grow up, they would have to experience such miserable and frightening scenes a few times. And it was from these repeated victories and defeats that they absorbed nourishment and grew stronger step by step. In their eyes, the Black Forest was the world of monsters and a paradise for wild monsters. Of course, it was also the battlefield where they obtained resources. However, at this moment, they were riding on the legendary chimeras, flying above the heads of monsters, freely traversing the forests, lakes, mountains, and rivers of the Black Forest. This kind of relaxed and comfortable feeling made them unable to help but feel relaxed and happy. This was the power of a wizard. No matter how ferocious a monster was, it could only bow its head and beg for its life in front of a great wizard who could see through the heavens and the earth, and then become obedient servants. Chapter 409. The arrival of Meryl and her group had undoubtedly made the Wizard's Pagoda more lively. They had also brought a large amount of resources and daily necessities, greatly replenishing the Wizard's Pagoda, allowing the disciples and apprentices to slowly modify the first and second levels of the Wizard's Pagoda. Grim, Cabby, and Meryl hid in the guest hall on the fourth level to discuss the future. In front of Meryl, the gnome Cabby handed a pouch to Grim. Within it were the 120,000 magical crystals he had mentioned earlier. But this time, it bluntly admitted that it was Alice who sent it through the Witch Chamber of Commerce. Alice would not send such a large number of magical crystals for no reason. What else did she say? Grim had a bad feeling. The person she sent also warned you to be careful of the attack of magical creatures. This time, it was Meryl who spoke. Her words also gave Grim a shock, and he lowered his head in deep thought. Attack of magical creatures? Others might not understand what she meant, but when Grim heard this warning, he immediately thought of some of the interesting stories he had read about in the books he had read in the past. In the process of the various wizard factions fighting for land with the Black Forest, there were definitely many examples of magical creatures attacking. It seemed that the magical creatures living in the Black Forest stubbornly believed that the humans' expansion of the forest would greatly affect the environment they lived in, bringing about all sorts of negative effects. Hence, once they discovered that humans had entered their territory, they would attack without restraint. Sometimes, they would even gather together and attack the human gathering points on the outskirts of the Black Forest with a plan. In the past, Grim had only seen it as a battle for land between the human wizards and the leader of the magical creatures. He had thought that as long as he was careful and did not touch the territory of the powerful magical creatures around him, he would not incur a strong backlash from them. But today, with Alice's warning, Grim had no choice but to reconsider the possibility of a magical creature attack. Ever since he came to the sickly forest, he had been hiding deep underground and rarely venturing outside. it was even more impossible for him to invade the territory of the surrounding magical creatures. So what was it that caused the leader of the magical creatures to be unable to tolerate his existence? Others might not be able to answer this question, but Grimm vaguely had an idea. The Wizard Tower. With the construction of the Wizard's Tower, it was inevitable that it would absorb the magical energy in the surroundings to maintain its operation. This also created a kind of artificial flow of magic. The distribution of magical elements was also different. The more the Wizard's pagoda extracted, the thinner the magical element around it would be. Ordinary jungle beasts would find it difficult to perceive such a change. But for magical creatures with mysterious abilities, it was as easy as reading lines on their palms. Seriously speaking, monsters were also magical creatures born from rich magical elements. They were especially sensitive to the flow and changes of elemental particles. How could they possibly allow an outsider to plunder the magical elements that they relied on for survival? Hence, the moment the elemental altar was activated, the Wizard's pagoda would become the target of the hatred of the surrounding magical creature leaders. When Grimm understood this, he immediately summoned Gargamel and asked him to contact the forest demon Ava, who had been wandering around the diseased forest. As expected, the forest demon sent back a message half a day later. The surrounding magical creatures had indeed shown signs of movement, as if they were slowly approaching the diseased forest. Only then did Grimm understand why Alice had gone through so much trouble to send 120,000 magical crystals. It was not for the construction of his tower, but for the defense of his tower. Up until now, the Wizard's pagoda's elemental altar had been operating for a day and a night, but the liquid magical energy in the center of the elemental pool had not even filled the bottom of the pool. This was even more so for the branch elemental pools and the magical energy pools below. They were still filled with misty magical energy, not dense enough to form magical essence. Now, most of the magical elements that the Wizard's pagoda absorbed were used to maintain and modify the space within the Wizard's pagoda. Only a small portion of the remaining energy could be channeled into the elemental pool. If the magical creatures attacked, the Wizard's pagoda would have to support the entire defense system. When that time came, just absorbing the magical elements would not be enough. Grimm got the chip to do some calculations. If the Wizard's pagoda shut down all non-essential wizard techniques and runic spell formations, then the magical elements gathered by the elemental altar could condense into 27 to 28 magical crystals. But this meant that the wizards and apprentices stationed in the tower had no choice but to endure the harsh environment around them. Without the airtight windows, the protection of the Wizard's pagoda, and the adjustment of the environment, the underground world where the Wizard's pagoda was located was hot and dry, but also lonely and desolate. Activating the Wizard's pagoda's defenses would require 12 to 15 magical crystals. If the related wizard techniques were activated, then the consumption of 20 to 22 magical crystals would become a necessity. After all, there were many secret wizard doors, defense spell formations, warning runes, and scouting crystals within the tower. All of these required the magical energy within the Wizard's pagoda to be activated. If one considered the wizard beasts, magic statues, and wizard gardens that they might have in the future, then the energy consumption of the Wizard's pagoda would be even more terrifying. It was laughably childish to think of using the Wizard's pagoda to slowly accumulate magical crystals for profit. This was also the main reason why most of the Wizard's pagoda's defenses were only activated at the lowest level during peacetime. Once a war broke out and the Wizard's pagoda's defenses were activated, then the Wizard's pagoda would instantly become a gold mine. The speed at which it consumed magical crystals was enough to make the Wizard Tower master cry. Grimm's current situation was that the other Wizard's pagodas might have tens or even hundreds of years' worth of magical energy. But his Wizard's pagoda was completely destitute, its storage so clean that a rat could starve to death. Grimm did not have any of the most crucial magical crystal reserves. The entire wizard's pagoda was in a state of running around. How could such a wizard's pagoda fight a war? Grim weighed the magical crystals Kabi had given him in his hand. He instantly understood their weight. These were not magical crystals, but the life of the wizard's pagoda beneath his feet. If he was the only one in the room, he would have had the urge to hug his head and cry. But at this moment, his two direct subordinates were staring at him. No matter how angry and wronged he was, he could only suppress it in his heart and slowly digest it. Grim smiled faintly. He really wanted to cry. Things aren't that bad. Grim held his forehead and thought seriously. First of all, this wizard's pagoda is not on the surface, so it won't be easily attacked by the wild beasts. Even if the magical beasts were to gather a large number of wild beasts, they would easily get lost in the dark underground labyrinth. It's easy to set up our first line of defense there. Secondly, this is only the edge of the Black Forest. The chances of level 2 magical beasts appearing here are not high. If it's just a group of level 1 magical beasts, we might be able to gain some extra rewards with the defense of the wizard's pagoda. Most importantly, there's a sea of lava beneath our feet. If I'm angered, I can use the power of the wizard's pagoda to extract the lava and pour it into these caves. How much combat power would the attacking magical beasts have left? Through rational analysis and judgment of the battle, Grim listed out the pros and cons of the battle one by one, and surprisingly found that he did not seem to be completely on the receiving end. It was also at this moment that Grim realized that Alice strongly supported his decision to come here to build a pagoda. This was indeed an excellent area for his development. Firstly, there were no large wizard families nearby, nor were there any terrifying magical beasts. This would prevent Grim from having to worry about his rise to power. Secondly, there was a hidden sea of lava beneath the disease forest. This would definitely be of great help to Grim's future growth. As long as he could fend off the attack of the magical beasts, the Black Forest would become his territory when the light of the wizard's pagoda shone on the nearby forests. If the magical beasts could not chase him away, they would have no choice but to leave this place and find a new home somewhere further away. There were not many safe places in the Black Forest that they could move to. Thus, even if it was for the sake of their own tribe, the magical beasts that usually did not get along would gather together to attack Grim's wizard's pagoda. That was why Grim would soon have to face an extremely difficult battle to defend. Stonehammer Ruins. In a weathered stone forest 30 miles east of the diseased forest, Forest Demon AI stood alone on top of a tall stone pillar. The surrounding weathered and damaged stone pillars were either thick or thin, tall or short, and so on and so forth. Standing on top of the stone pillar and looking into the distance, it was a monotonous world made of yellow and black. Countless valleys, caves, and stone forests were covered by the Black Forest, forming a complex terrain. It was also a natural habitat for the magical beasts. In the darkness, who knew how many dangerous fellows were hiding in the shadows and caves, spying on them silently. Under the call of the most experienced demon hunter Spider Tula, all the leaders of the wizard-level magical beasts in the nearby forest had gathered here. They were discussing the group of human wizards that had recently appeared in the Chimera's territory. They had all experienced the changes in the magical energy around the disease forest. The abnormal vibrations and loss of magical elements posed a serious threat to all the magical beasts present. In fact, many of the more experienced magical beasts insisted that the human wizards had already built a wizard's pagoda there. Otherwise, they could not explain the abnormal changes in the Black Forest. The wizard's pagoda. At the mention of this name, the expressions of all the magical beasts changed slightly. This was a name that all magical beasts hated and feared, because hearing it meant that the magical beasts would have to pay a huge price for it. Chapter 410. A few peculiar creatures quickly occupied the stone forest, including powerful magical beasts such as the three-headed demon hound, dark tentacle monster, and berserk giant baboon. Even though these creatures were not on good terms with each other, They suppressed their instincts out of respect for Lord Tula's powerful strength, exchanging looks of hatred with each other from afar. As for insignificant creatures like the forest demons and the twin-headed ogre, they could only stand outside the stone forest, silently awaiting the orders of the magical beast leaders. They're almost here. It's time to take action. The first to speak was an Itek, one of the many mutated descendants of the veteran Lord Tula. From its appearance, it looked like a strange creature that walked upright like a human, but had the appearance of an ugly insect. And the language it spoke usually represented the meaning of Lord Tula. A three-headed hellhound raised its 3 heads, which were covered in thick fur, and stared at the Idakai with its 6 dark red eyes. What's the plan? We can't just charge into the wizard pagoda of the human wizards recklessly. If the plan fails, you spiders can still hide underground, but we who live on the surface can only escape. So, we need a plan for this battle. As the leader of the Demon Hound tribe, 120 miles northwest of the Sick Forest, Anguja was the only 3-headed demon hound in the tribe. Its 3 dog heads not only gave it wind, fire, and poison wizard techniques, they also gave it an intellect that no one else could match. In this huge forest with a circumference of 400 to 500 miles, although it wasn't the most powerful, it was undoubtedly the smartest and most cunning of them all. Demon Hound was a wolf-shaped magical beast that could transform into a wolf or a gnome. Its true appearance was that of a hybrid between a gnome and a wolf, with a pair of terrifying jaws and sharp claws. When it was still a cub, the Demon Hound was completely similar to a wolf, except for its size and claws. When the Demon Hound grew larger and stronger, its skin would darken to a bluish-red color, eventually turning completely blue. As a special evolution of the canine demons, the 3-headed hellhound possessed the strength of an elite sorcerer. Its inherited Cerberus bloodline had been awakened. Apart from its powerful biting and gnawing abilities, each of its 3 heads possessed its own special sorcery ability. The green doghead on the left could instantly cast wind blades. The crimson doghead on the right could instantly cast chain fireballs, and the main doghead in the middle could spit out a large area of poisonous mist. Compared to its powerful attack skills, the 3-headed demon hound's defense was much weaker. Otherwise, it wouldn't have become the weakest demon chieftain here. Although the 3-headed devil hound had a thick hide to help it defend itself, its narrow waist was still its greatest weakness. It could not withstand the ferocious charge and bite of a strength-type creature. Therefore, even though the 3-headed hellhound loved to kill, it preferred ambushes and rarely launched direct attacks. I agree with Nguja. We need to have a plan. Otherwise, I have reason to suspect that someone is trying to exhaust our strength. A giant octopus-like dark tentacle monster supported the 3-headed devil hound. Muru, a dark-type magical creature, was the only dark tentacle monster in this area. He had the sturdy body of an adult male. However, his legs below his waist had been replaced by tentacles that were as thick as the mouth of a bull and over 10 meters long. The ends of his hands had transformed into countless slender tentacles that danced in the wind. They constantly wriggled and twisted, looking extremely disgusting. His entire body was naked, without a single piece of clothing or armor, and his body was surrounded by a strange black fog that couldn't be dispersed. Being stared at by his pair of dark and terrifying eyes, even in the daytime, would make one's hair stand on end. As a powerful and solitary magical creature, Muru had no kin or companions. However, with his terrifying dark-type sorcery and terrifying close combat skills, there were not many in the Black Forest who dared to provoke him. Tula, if you want to expel the human magi, we will all follow in your footsteps. However, in the battle, we must see your spider army, otherwise. The one who spoke was a Medusa who had just completed her transformation. As a well-known magical creature leader in this area, Medusa had 7 to 8 snake-haired demonesses and close to 100 underground creatures as slaves. She herself was also an elite-tier, earth-type magical creature. She had the body of a beautiful human female and a long tail like a rattlesnake. However, The most terrifying thing was that her hair was made up of countless wriggling little snakes. Her beautiful and bright eyes would shoot out terrifying rays of light from time to time. Anyone who looked directly at her would be attacked by the petrification spell. Her body was also naked, but her towering breasts were covered with a layer of tiny purplish-black scales. Her exposed skin was delicate and fair. Her smooth and slender hands seemed to be boneless, but they had the terrifying strength to tear tigers and leopards apart. Seriously speaking, in this area, apart from the countless descendants of the demon hunter spider Tula, she was already the most powerful magical creature leader among the surface monsters. In response to her words, the arrogant and despotic Aturk did not dare to belittle her. It could only move its ugly body to the side and give way to the mountain-like demon hunter spider Tula behind it. The oldest demon hunter spider, Tula, crawled 2 steps forward. Its huge body almost occupied all of the visual space in front of Medusa. The pressure from its body made Medusa shut her mouth. She inconspicuously retreated half a foot and stared at the powerful magical creature leader with a vigilant expression. In every region of the Dark Forest, there would be a magical creature lord with such terrifying power. They used their powerful strength to firmly occupy the area with the richest resources in this land and had the power to command the surrounding wild magical creatures. Anyone who defied it would be banished or eaten, without exception. Thus, even with Medusa's abilities and qualifications, she was not willing to directly challenge the oldest and most experienced magical creature leader. The densely packed compound eyes in front of the demon hunter spider's body flashed with a purple light, but its giant mouth did not open. It was using the mental language. Everyone present could directly understand what it wanted to express through their telepathy. The human wizards must die. Tula's voice was unusually noisy, as if thousands of tiny voices were stacked together. The wizard's pagoda must be destroyed. Otherwise, the black forest we live in will degenerate. This is something I will definitely not allow. Since the leader of the magical creatures had already issued a declaration of war, there was no need to discuss this matter any further. 3 days. Tula's voice continued to ring in the minds of the magical creature leaders. I'll only give you 3 days. 3 days later, you must bring all of your subordinates back here. When the time comes, we will launch an attack, destroy the wizard's pagoda, and kill the wizards. Anyone who doesn't show up will be punished. As soon as Tura's threatening words left his mouth, countless fist-sized little spiders crawled out from the surrounding underground, treetops, gaps between stone pillars, and bushes before baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at the people in the field as they rubbed their mouthparts. Even though the individual abilities of these little magical spiders were extremely weak, their numbers were uncountable. If such a large number of little magical spiders swarmed them, even an elite magical creature would not be able to escape unscathed. Faced with this threat, even though the expressions of the leaders of the magical creatures turned ugly, none of them dared to openly oppose Tula's orders. As magical creatures, they naturally understood that if they allowed the wizard's pagoda to take root here, they would be treated as prey and slaughtered one by the other. Thus, even though Tula's order was harsh, it was completely correct. They had no reason to oppose it. After a while, Grimm quickly received the image recording crystal that the forest demon Ava had sent back. After identifying the monster leaders one by one, even with Grimm's composure, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The leader of the demon-hunting spider, Tula, was most likely a peak elite magical creature. This also meant that it had a portion of the abilities of a level 2 magical creature. If he were to be ambushed by such a creature during battle, Grimm was not confident that he would be able to escape. As for the other leaders of the magical creatures, like the 3-headed demon hound, Medusa, dark tentacle monster, furious giant baboon, twin-legged flying dragon king, they were all powerful elite-level magical creatures. If you were to pull them out individually, Grimm would not dare say that he would be able to win against any of them. As for the ordinary magical creatures that were a level lower, such as the minotaurs, furious baboons, demon hounds, iths, even with the abilities of the forest demon Ava, she would only be at the bottom of the list. It would be difficult for her to turn the tables during battle. Compared to these powerful magical creatures, the large number of small monsters did not interest Grimm at all. Grimm had already made up his mind. Once the magical creatures entered the cave, he would take drastic measures and unleash the 7 armies ablaze. Beneath the wizard's pagoda was a bottomless sea of lava. He did not know how many of the powerful magical beasts would die if a large amount of lava was drawn out and poured into the cave, but he was certain that none of these small monsters would be able to escape. The current situation was that the enemy had the advantage in numbers, while their battle capabilities were weak, and the energy of the wizard's pagoda was so scarce that it made people cry. But if they were to really fight, the outcome of the battle would not be as clear as the strength displayed on the surface. The methods of the wizards were vicious and ruthless, and it was not something that these isolated magical creatures could imagine. If those magical creatures really dared to come, Grimm decided that he would definitely leave a deep impression on them that they would never be able to erase. Playing with the human wizards. Chapter 411. 3 days later. The area around the diseased forest had become a sea of wild beasts. The earth was shaking, and the forest was howling. Countless armored rhinoceroses, razorback wild boars, mountain leopards, and giant pythons swarmed out from deep within the forest, flooding the land in front of them like a flood. Behind them, hordes of wolves, lions, and ferocious tigers ran and howled. Countless baboons and giant apes leaped between the treetops, as if they were flying, occasionally letting out loud cries that shook the entire forest. Looking down from the sky, in the boundless and precipitous forests and mountains, countless wild beasts were running and roaring, and some were even fighting and biting each other. The entire forest was filled with black spots. There were lions, tigers, bulls, black bears, wild boars, cheetahs, giant lizards, pythons, and even bats, baboons, and owls, all of them running toward the diseased forest with all their might. The leaders of the magical beasts drove hordes of ferocious beasts out of their nests, heading straight for the forest. Along the way, they caught up with many low-level wild beasts. By the time they got close to the diseased forest, they had formed a small-scale beast tide. The pack of chimeras that occupied the area around the diseased forest did not show themselves. The horde of beasts charged straight into the cave at the foot of the mountain, heading underground through the dark tunnel. The many bats living in the cave were startled. They flapped their wings and flew into the sky, circling the nearby forest like a black cloud. But with the arrival of the large flock of birds, the bats that were reluctant to leave immediately scattered and fled into the surrounding forest, not daring to show their faces again. Up in the sky, a witchcraft eye formed by the condensation of fire elements was silently overlooking everything beneath it, trying its best to focus its gaze on a few particularly burly monsters. On top of a pile of rocks in front of the cave, a dozen or so monster leaders stood tall, driving the beasts into the underground. The hidden wizard eye slowly swept its gaze across them. Grimm and Gargamel, who were in the underground wizard's pagoda, carefully observed the attacking magical beasts through the water mirror. The three-headed magic hound, Nguja, with 3 heads, was perched on top of a pile of rocks, letting out a strange bark with its bloody mouth wide open. In front of it, 14 canine devil beasts were sniffing around with sticky saliva dripping from their mouths. They were acting as supervisors, growling and urging the beasts to move faster. She had the appearance of a beautiful woman, a long snake tail behind her, and a head full of strange snake hair. Her snake-like lower body was covered with purplish-black fine scales, and her 4-meter-tall body had the seductive head of a beautiful human woman. Her naked upper body was only covered with indigo-colored sharp scales, and the mound of flesh in front of her chest was densely covered with layers upon layers of indigo-colored sharp teeth. As a female Medusa, the 2 bulging bulges on Dana's chest kept swaying with her every move, which was very eye-catching. On her back was a strange-looking longbow, which seemed to be some kind of powerful magical weapon. She tried her best to straighten her slender tail, lifting her beautiful body up high, making her look taller and more majestic than the other monsters around her. In front of her, there were 7 Medusae with short bows in their hands, and their long, forked tongues flicking out from their mouths. Their figures were not much different from Medusa's, but the color of the snake tails and the fine scales on their bodies were a little dimmer. As for their abilities, only 2 of them had reached the rank of a wizard. The other 5 ranged from quasi-wizards to intermediate apprentices, and their abilities varied. Surrounding the Medusae were 10 or so tall and muscular minotaurs. The minotaurs looked like tall humans with the head of a bull. They were about 7 feet tall when they stood up and weighed more than 700 pounds, about 320 kilograms. They were covered in thick hair and had a pair of large horns on their heads. Their hands were similar to humans, but they had 5 fingers on their palms. Their thumbs faced the other 4, and there were sharp claws at the ends of the fingers. Their feet were similar to the broad hooves of a bull. There was a metal ring at the tip of the Minotaur's nostrils, and the air they exhaled caused the metal ring to vibrate as they walked, making a clanking sound. A pair of blood-red, angry eyes scanned left and right, and foot-long scars could be seen everywhere on their chests. They held a large axe in their hands, and it looked like they were about to devour someone. These Minotaurs were obviously low-level magical creatures enslaved by Medusa. They loyally guarded the Medusae, vigilantly watching any enemy that dared to approach them. Apart from these impressive magical creature leaders, there was also the berserk baboon Split-Tooth, the 2-legged flying dragon King Lark, and the Ite monster Gully. All of them had strange appearances, and they looked like terrifying magical creatures that walked out of the encyclopedia of magical creatures. They gathered in front of the cave, silently waiting for the arrival of the main characters of today's battle. They didn't have to wait for long. After a large group of beasts entered the underground, countless terrifying little magic spiders surged out from the black forest not far away. Their numbers had reached an astonishing level, densely covering the entire field of vision. The little magic spiders were about the size of a fist, and their hairy black bodies were covered in purple stripes. They had 4 pairs of slender spider legs, and on their backs was a large, round, and bulging belly. Surrounded by the tide-like little spiders, Tula's mountain-like body slowly appeared in front of the people. "Since you're here, let's attack." Tula's voice echoed in the minds of the magical creature leaders. "I can't wait to taste the sweet flesh and blood of human wizards." Let the children move. Following Tula's order, the number of spiders surging out of the forest increased by a few orders of magnitude. Countless spiders of different sizes swarmed out, and in an instant, some of the beasts that didn't have time to rush into the cave were drowned. Strange sounds of chewing and biting could be heard from the sea of spiders. The beasts that were drowned by the sea of spiders could no longer be seen. All that could be seen were small, squirming, and bulging lumps. When the lumps exploded, the spiders surged past them, leaving only a set of white animal bones and a few strands of hair. None of the magical creature leaders dared to protest against these sporadic, accidental injuries. They could only try their best to restrain their subordinates and make them avoid the direction of the spider army. The veteran demon-hunting spider, Tula's hairy face, didn't show any expression. It stretched out its sturdy limbs, leaving behind deep scratches on the rocks that were as hard as steel. "Let's go, we should go in too." Under its lead, the magical creature leaders followed behind the tide-like spider army and swarmed into the Bat Cave. The leaders in the rear had yet to make a move, but the front lines of the battle were already filled with blood. As the leader of the magical creatures in the sick forest, the chimeras had a powerful influence in the underground world that outsiders could not compare to. Before the enemy launched an attack, they would dive deep into the ground and drive large groups of underground creatures to the shallow surface. This way, when the beasts on the surface rushed into the dark, deep, and interconnected labyrinthine tunnels, the first thing they encountered were these cold-blooded killers hiding in the dark caves and cracks in the rock strata. Rock pythons, petrified lizards, clawed terror, underground dwarves, evil eyes, gnolls, lizardmen, harpies. These creatures that lived deep underground were all experts in ambushes and ambushes. They hid in every corner, and every time a prey passed by, they would jump up and use their poisonous teeth or strange natural abilities to make the prey instantly lose the ability to resist. Under their ambush, the first batch of forest beasts that rushed into the underground suffered heavy losses and quickly became delicious meals in their stomachs. However, there were too many creatures on the surface that rushed in. The once silent underground tunnel had now become a noisy market. The roars of lions and tigers could be heard everywhere, and the howls of wolves and apes could be heard everywhere. Too many prey had just been strangled by them, and before they could even have a good meal, the stampeding beast tide surged over. The underground killers, who had never seen such a scene, could not care less about killing and chose to hide. The unlucky ones who did not hide in time immediately became the stepping stones of the swarming beast tide. It was fine if it was stepped on a few times by fellows like the wild wolf or earth leopard, but if it were to be trampled on by a huge black bear or a panting razor boar, even a petrified lizard with thick scales would have a hard time keeping its life. In the twisting and turning underground tunnels, terrifying sounds of tearing and biting rang out from countless dark corners, accompanied by shrill, short screams and angry roars. In these dark corners that no one could see, lives that were originally fresh and lively were quickly lost just like that. From the entrance to the underground cave complex where the wizard's pagoda was, all of the underground tunnels were filled with the grotesque corpses of the surface creatures and bloodstains. The corpses of the weak creatures had even turned into pools of flesh and blood that no one could discern after being trampled by countless pairs of stinking hooves. Even though the underground creatures had put up a good fight, there were too many surface creatures charging in. Thus, in less than half an hour, this batch of underground creatures had been completely wiped out, and the beast tide that had lost its restraints continued to charge deeper into the underground. In just half an hour, as many as 3,000 creatures had died in these underground labyrinths. Less than 400 of them had been killed by the underground creatures, and the rest had died in the disorderly crowding and trampling. These surface creatures that had been chased here were clearly not used to this dim environment, where one could not even see their own fingers. In this place, they could not see anything and could not determine the direction they were heading in. Most of the beasts charging at the front were injured by the rough underground tunnels. If they slowed down a little, they would be trampled and killed by their companions behind them. Thus, if they did not want to die, the only way was to run forward in the dark. Run forward. As long as there was a path in front of them, they would run with all their might. Chapter 412. Within the Wizard's Pagoda. The scouting crystals and wizard eyes set up in the tunnels were discovered and destroyed by the enemies, but the remaining ones still revealed the situation outside to the water mirror in the central hall. Seeing the terrifying scene of tens of thousands of heads moving in the tunnels and the roaring of the beasts, all the apprentices in the Wizard's Pagoda could not help but feel their hearts in their throats, silently wondering if it was the right decision to continue staying here. The underground tunnels extended in all directions, and it was possible to find cracks in the rock strata and canyons that could barely allow people to pass through in any region. As long as they escaped from the Wizard's Pagoda and hid in a corner far away, there was still a chance that they could escape this undeserved disaster. The power of both sides was so disproportionate that even the prospective wizards who had been following Grimm for a long time had lost the confidence that they would win. Many of them silently hoped that they would abandon the pagoda and escape upon Grimm's command. That way, there might still be a chance that some of them would survive. Once the gate was blocked by the beast tide and there was no teleportation formation in the Wizard's Pagoda, what else could they do to escape? The apprentices in the tower worked hard to do their own work while thinking about it in torment. Most of the time, they did not have an answer, nor did they dare to have an answer. Although the name of their mentor, Fire Demon, resounded through the skies in the Federant area, in the face of a terrifying opponent that was like a mountain entering the sea, How many could he kill no matter how powerful his individual strength was? Among the leaders of the magical beasts, there were as many as 5 elite magical beasts and 17 wizard-level magical beasts. As for ordinary magical beasts, there were no less than 3 digits. On the other hand, Grimm could barely be considered an elite wizard. Gargamel was a veteran wizard, and Meryl was a newly advanced wizard. Other than them, the strongest defense of the Wizard's Pagoda was a group of 11 underground chimeras and the mechanical girl, Sabrina. Among the 12 apprentices, there were 5 prospective wizards and 7 high-level apprentices. With this kind of power, if they were paired with a well-functioning Wizard Pagoda, they still had a chance. But even though the Wizard Pagoda had been desperately storing energy for the past 4 days, the elemental pool in the energy room was still not full. Once the battle started, it would be difficult to last more than an hour. If the battle was too intense, this time would be even shorter. Even though the apprentices did not go into the energy room to see what was going on, they could tell that the Wizard's Pagoda was lacking in energy at the moment. Even if they were to think with their toes, they could tell that the Wizard's Pagoda was lacking in energy at the moment. But in contrast, Grimm's attitude was unusually firm and resolute. Grimm only ordered the chimeras to block the underground creatures. He did not send any apprentices into the terrifying underground labyrinth. With the strength of the acolytes, without any concealment or protection, it would be wishful thinking for them to stop the attacks of the beasts. Thus, Grimm did not waste any effort. Instead, he gathered them into the Wizard's Pagoda and assigned them to an offensive wizard formation. He, Gargamel, and Meryl were directly responsible for guarding the door of the Wizard's Pagoda. Once the battle started, that place would undoubtedly become the most ferocious region. 3 hours after the beasts started their attack, the wave of surface beasts finally broke through the underground labyrinth and poured into the underground cave where the Wizard's Pagoda was. Like a super huge octopus, the army formed by the beasts kept extending inside the cave. The huge number of beasts occupied every inch of space in sight in an instant. On the ground were countless ferocious beasts such as lions, tigers, and cheetahs. Of course, there was no lack of terrifying monsters such as forest trolls, forest fairies, berserk apes, razor boars, lazy beasts, and lightning leopards. The sky was filled with birds such as crows, turtle doves, and woodpeckers. There were also ferocious beasts such as thunder rocks, twin-legged flying dragons, and griffins. There were also many harmless creatures such as snakes, deer, and owls amidst the tide of beasts. All the creatures gathered together, roaring in unison as they charged toward the glowing Wizard's Pagoda in the center of the cave. Almost as soon as they stepped into the cave, a huge wave of magical energy rose from the Wizard's Pagoda. Balls of lava shot out like meteors, dragging long trails of black smoke behind them as they fell into the crowd of beasts. Thud, 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 like a concentrated barrage of grenades exploding at the same time, the beasts that had just revealed themselves were instantly blasted into pieces, their bodies a mess. Wherever the violent shockwave of flames swept past, the forest beasts with weak life force were instantly killed or injured, and the rain of lava that splashed everywhere instantly wiped out a large group of beasts. Not to mention the ordinary forest beasts. Even an ordinary magical creature with beginner-level magical resistance would not be able to withstand such a violent fireball. The vanguard of the beast horde that had just entered the cave was instantly wiped out. What was even more terrifying was that the lava rain that splashed everywhere would ignite a raging fire wherever it landed. The terrifyingly high temperature and ferocious flames instantly incinerated the small animals that had just gotten close. Against the magical flames created by the elemental wizard, the beasts and birds that did not have any magical resistance could not get close at all. No matter how many of them there were, they would only die if they charged in. Furthermore, these were not ordinary natural flames. It was difficult to extinguish them with the sheer numbers of the beast horde. Hence, after the entrance of the cave was sealed by the magic flames, the ordinary beasts struggled with all their might, not daring to take a step forward. However, they were continuously pushed forward by their companions, and were then pushed into the sea of flames with faces full of despair. After a preliminary analysis of the species of the attacking beast horde, Grimm had already adjusted most of the offensive wizard spells in the wizard's pagoda to lava fireballs. The wizard apprentices did not need to expend any of their energy. All they had to do was stay comfortably in the wizard's pagoda, then follow Grimm's instructions and throw the lava fireballs at the predetermined area. In order to conserve as much energy as possible, Grimm did not put up a full protective force field. Instead, he focused all of his energy on the offensive wizard formation. With a dozen or so lava fireballs, Grimm completely sealed off the entrance of the cave. If the beast horde wanted to charge in, they would not be able to get close to the wizard's pagoda without paying a price. After the first round of fireballs, all of the apprentices stopped attacking and quietly waited for Grimm's instructions. This also showed how terrifying the fire element wizard spells were. Most of the other wizard spells would disappear after being released for a period of time. However, after the lava fireball that Grimm chose exploded, it created a small sea of lava on the ground near the entrance of the cave. As long as the lava was not extinguished, the sea of fire would never disappear. Hence, they could last for a long time and were especially difficult to destroy. Seeing that only a dozen lava fireballs were used to seal the advance of the beast horde, the apprentices in the wizard's pagoda immediately cheered. However, Grimm did not have to wait. The beast horde that was blocked in front of him quickly made a new move. Like a geyser, the black mass of flying beasts flew over the heads of the beast horde and rushed into the cave. They formed a dense formation and rushed toward the wizard's pagoda from the sky. Grimm, who was standing in the control hall of the wizard's pagoda, scanned the area with his mental energy and did not care about the flying beasts. Although their numbers were dense and intimidating, if one were to take a closer look, most of them were almost harmless, ordinary flying beasts. Magical beasts like twin-legged flying dragons, thunder rocks, and griffins were in the minority. A red glow flashed in Grimm's hand. As he whispered, he gave an order to the leader of the chimeras. A closed window on the third level of the wizard's pagoda suddenly opened, and 9 wizard-level chimeras rushed out. They did not attack the black mass of birds, but circled around the wizard's pagoda. Under Grimm's command, the second round of lava fireballs was thrown at the flock of birds. Just like the first round of attack, the violent wizard spells brought a devastating blow to the flock of birds. No matter how ferocious the flying beasts were, they would be turned into a giant fireball as soon as they came into contact with the lava rain. Therefore, after the second round of witchcraft, the air in the cave that was previously impenetrable became sparse in an instant. The leader of the chimeras and a few adult chimeras took the opportunity to meet the few exposed flying beasts, while the 2 young chimeras flapped their bat wings and charged into the flock of birds, killing them in a frenzy. In an instant, the cacophony of bird cries and the angry roars of the chimeras blended together. Both parties clashed and killed each other in the air near the wizard's pagoda. Bird corpses and blood rained down. Under Grimm's strict orders, the chimeras would never stray more than 100 meters away from the wizard's pagoda, no matter how intense the battle was. Whenever they were surrounded by the ferocious flying beasts, they would quickly hide within the protective circle of the wizard's pagoda, using their sharp claws to grab onto the walls of the wizard's pagoda to rest. If the flying beasts dared to get close, the wizard's pagoda would fire a lava fireball at them. Within a range of 100 meters, only those small and nimble magical creatures could dodge the fireball's attack. Large creatures like the twin-legged flying dragons were often forced to use their membranous wings to deflect the lava rain. Hence, when the twin-legged flying dragon and griffin were blasted into pieces by the lava fireball and fell from the sky, none of the flying beasts dared to approach the wizard's pagoda. Hence, even though the number of chimeras was far less than the number of flying beasts, with the protection of the wizard's pagoda, they were still able to put up a good fight. Instead, the number of flying beasts in the sky began to decrease rapidly. Hence, even though the number of chimeras was far less than the number of flying beasts, with the protection of the wizard's pagoda, the number of flying beasts in the sky began to decrease rapidly. Chapter 413. Due to the lack of an effective command from the leader of the magical creatures, the attacks of the beast horde were chaotic. But with the arrival of the leaders of the magical creatures, the previously disorderly beast horde immediately became orderly. The berserk baboons were organized. They brandished the broken stalagmites and threw them into the sticky and hot magma. Using them as stepping stones, the ferocious beast horde once again surged forward, slowly spreading out in the lava hall. This time, in order to avoid being blocked by the wizard's pagoda, they quickly spread out in all directions the moment they charged in, flooding the entire hall like a terrifying tide. Amidst the terrifying beast horde, a dozen leaders of the magical creatures slowly moved into the lava hall under the protection of their trusted subordinates. They each occupied an area and began to examine the wizard's pagoda in front of them. This was a mysterious wizard's pagoda made from volcanic rock. The wizard's pagoda was not tall. It looked like a miniature wizard's pagoda. Moreover, he couldn't see the dazzling elemental fluorescence on the body of the pagoda, nor did he see the transparent force field protecting it. In summary, this should be an incomplete wizard pagoda that couldn't reach its greatest defensive power. Seeing this, all of the leaders of the magical creatures could not help but be secretly elated. Their previous pointless worries also dissipated. Human wizards were all weak, and their combat abilities were so weak that they could not fight against magical creatures of the same level. But they had forcefully taken away pieces of the black forest from the hands of the thousands of magical creatures, transforming them into fertile land for humans to live in. What did they rely on? It was the wizard tower that was hated by the magical creatures. No matter how many mortals the magical creatures killed in a human settlement, everything they did would be for naught if they could not destroy the wizard's pagoda erected in the center of the area. If hundreds or thousands of mortals died, the wizards would quickly migrate more people from other areas. Just killing mortals would not be able to stop the wizards from advancing. After all, the speed at which humans reproduced was something the magical creatures could not compare to. Only by destroying the wizard's pagoda would they be able to cut off the evil hands of the wizards and completely drive them out of the Black Forest. But so far, there were only a few successful wizard towers that had been destroyed due to the invasion of monsters, even if one flipped through all the historical records. One of the main reasons was that the Magus Tower was too powerful. The wizard pagoda was like a hard tortoise shell. If the magical beasts wanted to use their bodies to break through the door of the wizard's pagoda, they would have to endure the torrential wizard spells. Under such circumstances, the weakness of a human sorcerer's body was deeply hidden. Instead, they could fully display the strength of their sorcery power. Thus, when the attacking magical creature leaders saw the weak elemental protective glow on the wizard's pagoda, their battle intent immediately rose. The veteran aberration lord, Tula, stepped into the battlefield step by step with its 8 long limbs covered in bristly hair. The end of each appendage was like a sharp knife. Regardless of whether it was sand, mud, or hard rock, they would all be inserted, supporting the rest of the enormous body. Following Tura's arrival, an alarming number of magical spiders of various sizes swarmed out like the tide. The wriggling figures of the spiders could be seen on the ground, the stone walls, and even the tall ceiling of the lava hall. Unfortunately, there were too few guards sent out by the wizard's pagoda, and they never strayed more than 100 meters away from the wizard's pagoda. Thus, the massive army of spiders could not find the enemy, and could only crazily swarm toward the tall wizard's pagoda in the distance. The lava fireballs spat out by the wizard's pagoda became more concentrated. Every volley of fireballs could blast a dense sea of fire in the lava hall and successfully eliminate the enemies there. However, the remaining magma flames did not extinguish immediately and continued to burn stubbornly. Thus, with every round of attack from the wizard's pagoda, An area of the lava hall would become a sea of fire that no living creature could step into. If the wizard's pagoda was allowed to attack continuously, the wizards within the wizard's pagoda would turn the entire lava hall into a burning sea of fire in less than 15 minutes. And taking advantage of the time when the group of beasts scattered to avoid the flames, another 20 fire spirits made of pure fire elements charged out of the wizard's pagoda, surrounding the wizard's pagoda and spitting elemental flames at the enemy without restraint. In an instant, with the protection of the chimeras in the sky and the protection of the fire spirits on the ground, the ordinary beasts were slaughtered before they could even get close. As for the more powerful magical beasts, once they got close to the wizard's pagoda, they would be bombarded by the concentrated lava fireballs. Even if a wyvern was as strong as it could still struggle to escape after being hit by 1 or 2 lava fireballs. However, if it was hit by 3 at the same time, even it would be roasted into a charred corpse amidst a series of earth-shattering explosions. The leaders of the magical beasts saw with their own eyes that an iron-armored rhinoceros covered in thick fleshy scales crashed into 2 fire spirits as it charged forward. But immediately after, 3 to 4 lava fireballs shot toward it, and its majestic body was immediately blasted into pieces. It struggled for a few steps before falling to the ground, howling in pain. One side of its massive body had already been blasted into pieces. Its flesh, organs, and bones had all been vaporized by the violent fire elements, leaving only half of its pitiful body that was charred and filled with a pungent smell. It's impossible to rely on these little creatures. Medusa knit her brows tightly. Beasts are afraid of fire. As long as the other party sets up a ring of flames around the wizard's pagoda, they will be able to block most of the beasts. This way, it will be difficult for us to display our advantage in numbers. Let my children open up a path for you. The one who spoke was the giant berserk baboon covered in thick black fur. It charged forward a few steps, beating its chest hard as it let out a deafening roar. Under its agitation, dozens of agile figures charged out of the group of beasts, quickly approaching the wizard's pagoda. Every time a lava fireball flew out of the wizard's pagoda with a long tail of black smoke, they would pick up a rock and throw it. When the lava fireball exploded midway, even though it covered a large area, it posed a much lower threat to most of the ferocious beasts. Under their cover, the iron-armored rhinoceros formed a small cleanup team. They circled around the wizard's pagoda and easily crushed the fire elemental spirits. As for the lava fireballs that flew out of the wizard's pagoda, they were all destroyed by the berserk baboons who were good at throwing. Without the support of the wizard's pagoda, the chimeras in the sky were gradually unable to hold on. With a long, shrill cry, an adult chimera was chased by 2 twin-legged flying dragons. It tumbled and fell from the sky, landing heavily on the ground. And this was just the prologue. In the sky, the chimeras that had the upper hand a moment ago were surrounded by the ferocious beasts. Both sides fought fiercely, biting and killing. The injuries of the chimeras worsened, and they had no choice but to return to the wizard's pagoda. Just like that, without the obstruction of the chimeras and fire elemental spirits, the beast tide finally came into contact with the tall wizard's pagoda. A dull thud resounded. All the wizards and apprentices within the wizard's pagoda could faintly feel the pagoda's body tremble. The tide-like horde of beasts surrounded the wizard's pagoda, attacking the rock-solid body of the wizard's pagoda with all their might. Under normal circumstances, the wizard's pagoda was supported by a full energy field. If an outsider wanted to attack the wizard's pagoda, they would have to first break through the outer layer of the protective shield. But the wizard's pagoda before them, due to its lack of energy, could not support such a full energy field. It could only try its best to supply the elemental energy in the energy room to the attack spell formations scattered throughout the wizard's pagoda. Hence, the wizard's pagoda was running around, relying entirely on its sturdiness to fight against the beast tide. Swoosh, 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 streaks of lava fireballs with long tails of black smoke trailing behind them were like howitzers, blasting the lava floor around the wizard's pagoda into pieces. A large area of lava sea of fire could devour all living beings within a 10-meter radius every time it exploded. Every round of attacks from the wizard's pagoda took the lives of hundreds of forest beasts. But after a dozen rounds of attacks, the beast tide around the wizard's pagoda became even denser. If not for the large area of lava sea of fire clearing out a few spots from time to time, the entire lava hall would have become so densely packed that there would be no place to stand. Grim stood in the wizard's pagoda, his consciousness tightly connected to the entire wizard's pagoda. Looking down from above, he could see that the wizard's pagoda was surrounded by tens of thousands of beasts. The frenzied attacks of the beast tide had also caused great damage to the pagoda. In Grimm's senses, the outer stone walls of the pagoda were already showing signs of damage. A series of alarms rang in his mind. But no matter how dangerous the situation was, Grimm was still unmoved. His attention was not on the small fries and crab generals, but on the dozen or so magical creature leaders. Their every action could affect Grimm's heart. The reason why he had endured so much was to lure these fellows over. It would be a pity if these fellows were not at the forefront when the killing machine was unleashed. Outside the wizard's pagoda, the attacks of the beast tide came one after another. At the thick and sturdy base of the wizard's pagoda, countless wild beasts and magical creatures were digging into the rock-solid lava floor and the body of the pagoda, which was carved with sturdy symbols. At the entrance of the wizard's pagoda, a dozen iron-armored rhinoceroses, wild baboons, and razor wild boars were in a formation, madly slamming into the adamantine door. The low, hoarse sounds of the slamming reverberated in the lava hall. Every slamming would cause the beast tide to roar and howl in madness. Their passion had clearly infected the reserved magical creature leaders. The position they were guarding was also continuously moving forward, and they were almost 200 meters away from the wizard's pagoda. And this was the best distance that Grimm had calculated for himself. Sensing the madness and unscrupulousness outside the wizard's pagoda, Grimm clenched his teeth and raised his right hand. A translucent magical crystal was flashing with a strange light. Chapter 414. Within the energy room of the wizard's pagoda, Gargamel was working with a frown on his face. His job was simple. He had to toss a mountain of beautiful magical crystals into the elemental pool, then watch as they instantly turned into pure magical energy and were absorbed by the wizard's pagoda's defense system. With his hard work, 140,000 magical crystals had been neatly stacked in the elemental pool. As the battle continued, the magical crystals were quickly depleted. Fortunately, Grimm did not activate his force field defense. Otherwise, the wizard's pagoda would suffer unbearable damage from the hundreds and thousands of attacks, and the magical crystals in front of him would not be able to last long. With this in mind, Grimm gave up on the force field defense, allowing the wizard's pagoda to withstand the attacks of the beast tide with its sturdiness. Most of the energy was supplied to the offensive wizard formation within the pagoda. Lava fireballs shot out of the wizard's pagoda at every moment, clearing an empty space for the beast tide that had surrounded the wizard's pagoda. Every round of attacks from Merrill and the other apprentices would cause the magical crystals in the elemental pool to lose a layer. Even though he was mentally prepared, Gargamel felt as if his heart had been clawed by the sharp claws of a wild cat when he saw the mountain of magical crystals melt bit by bit in front of him. That kind of regret and hatred was hard to understand. As a wandering wizard, he did not have a fixed source of magical crystals. Everything he needed was obtained by selling wizard potions. In order to avoid attracting the attention of the wizard families and the covetous eyes of the lone wolves, he had to be very careful. That was why being poor was a common trait among all wandering wizards. Now that he had suddenly seen such a large amount of magical crystals, he had the urge to jump into the pool and roar in joy. Thus, when the magical crystals melted at a speed visible to the naked eye, Gargamel's heart was silently bleeding. But just as Gargamel was clenching his teeth and continuing to pour magical crystals into the pool, the wizard's pagoda suddenly shook violently. Nearly half of the magical crystals in the elemental pool disappeared in an instant. Has the indiscriminate destruction plan been activated? Gargamel suddenly raised his head, using the control authority of the wizard's pagoda in his hands to sense what was happening outside the pagoda. The wizard's pagoda was still shaking, but the world outside the pagoda was already in chaos. The wave of beasts unleashed by the veteran demon lord, demon hunter Spider Tula, had almost included most of the beasts within 700 miles of the disease forest. Although their numbers were huge, they were not inexhaustible. So at this moment, most of the beasts that the leaders of the monsters had driven here had rushed into the underground tunnel and filled every inch of space there. Just as they were attacking the wizard's pagoda, which was on the verge of collapse, an earth-shattering rumble came from the depths of the sickly forest. Immediately after that, a huge crack suddenly appeared on the hill where the sick forest was located. A huge dust pillar that was 100 meters tall shot out from the crack. The drastic change in the terrain immediately triggered a strong earthquake, the dislocation of rock strata, and the violent eruption of volcanoes. Almost half of the originally complicated underground maze collapsed in an instant, and most of the remaining passages were twisted and dislocated, blocked by the sand and debris that poured down. At the same time, the body of the wizard's pagoda in the middle of the lava hall suddenly lit up. The dark red body of the wizard's pagoda that was made of volcanic rock released a blinding red glow under the influence of the alarmingly dense fire element, illuminating the entire lava hall in red. The floor around the base of the wizard's pagoda suddenly turned red and hot, and countless terrifying cracks instantly appeared on it. Terrifyingly hot flames spewed out of the ground, instantly sending countless wild beasts flying to the top of the cave. However, when they fell from the sky again, they had already turned into charred, scattered bones. As for their flesh, it had already been vaporized by the high temperature. The beast horde that had been on steroids a moment ago immediately panicked, running around to avoid the scorching hot air and the towering pillars of fire. The massive lava hall immediately descended into chaos. The enemy is activating some kind of powerful wizard spell. We have to stop him. The demon hunter Spider Tula was indeed a veteran leader that had lived for 1,000 years. Faced with such a cruel environment, it bravely charged toward the wizard's pagoda that was filled with strange phenomena. Under its lead, the magical creature leaders that had been watching the battle from the sidelines all charged toward the wizard's pagoda. But at this moment, the cracks on the floor were no longer limited to the surroundings of the wizard's pagoda. Instead, they quickly spread throughout the entire lava hall. When the hot air was almost fully released, the thick, pungent smell of sulfur began to spread throughout the entire area. Following that, viscous red lava continuously surged out of the ground, then flowed wantonly along the undulating volcanic rock floor. If it was only a portion of the lava that had been carried up by the air current, the many magical creature leaders present would not be afraid. But as the lava continued to gush out, the entire lava hall was almost completely covered in boiling red lava. This also brought a disaster to the beast horde crowded in the hall. They were only ferocious beasts that dominated the forest. They did not have magic-resistant skin, nor did they have the ability to fly. How could they defend against the rolling waves of lava with their bodies of flesh and blood? Thus, countless wild beasts frantically climbed the stone pillars and stalagmites that were on higher ground, trying their best to step on their companions, using this method to delay the time of their deaths. But it was all for naught. Amidst the earth-shattering tremors, the underground tunnel that led outside broke into 3 or 4 sections, already broken and distorted to the point that it was difficult to pass through. The beast horde that had been trapped in the tunnel was almost instantly destroyed by tons of sand and soil, while even more of the beast horde was still trapped in the lava hall. But what awaited them was not good news. The sea of lava continued to rise, going from barely covering one's feet to more than half a meter deep. It had completely drowned the entire lava hall and had also buried thousands of wild beasts in it. If such a massive beast horde was left to humans to slaughter, it would take at least a day or two to kill all of them. Furthermore, the scene would be abnormally bloody, accompanied by a pungent stench. But when the culprit became the continuously rising sea of lava, everything became so calm and peaceful. Even the most powerful wild beasts or magical creatures did not have the ability to survive in the lava. They could still howl pitifully at the start, but once they lost their grip on the stone walls and fell into the sea of lava, just a small bubble of fire would swell up, and a ferocious and tyrannical life would disappear. Iron-armored rhinoceroses, berserk baboons, razor boars. These fellows were all super meat shields and fighters with thick skin and long life force. But once they fell into the surging, viscous flow of lava, they did not even have the chance to struggle or resist. They were burnt to a crisp in minutes and then burned to ashes. At the start, these birds could still flap their wings and fly quickly, barely keeping their lives. But as the heat wave and flames consumed all the air in the cave, they could not find a place to temporarily stay. So they all fell into the slowly flowing lava and were swallowed up with nothing left. After a quarter of an hour, there were less than 2 digits of magical creatures left in the previously crowded lava hall. They were all climbing on some thick stone pillars, anxiously looking around for a gap to escape. As for their subordinates and clansmen, they had all been swallowed up by the rising sea of lava. Of the dozen or so magical creature leaders, only a few had the ability to fly. Even the minotaur that followed Medusa was fighting with the berserk baboon over a stone pillar and was knocked into the lava by the latter, burnt to a crisp. The hunting spider, Tula, spat out a white spider web, pulling itself to the top of the cave, temporarily escaping the threat of the lava that was slowly approaching. However, the other magical creature leaders did not have this ability and could only try their best to use their sharp claws to grab the stone walls or pillars, trying their best to climb higher. Just as they were feeling anxious and angry, a tall human figure slowly rose from the roiling lava. The body formed by the scarlet lava gradually solidified, and the face of a human magus appeared on the uneven head. "It's an honor to meet all of you here." Grim smiled and looked around at the miserable state of the people around him. "The war you have just started has been lost. What do you think of the future?" Human. The hunting spider, Tula, hung upside down on the top of the cave, its ferocious mouth and pincers rubbing against each other, and its dense compound eyes flashed with a strange light. "You've already won this war, and you can control this land? Don't even think about it. The Black Forest belongs to us magical creatures. You humans, get out of our land." With a crazy roar and psychic shock, the hunting spider suddenly loosened its grip on the top of the cave and pounced towards the burning man. The hunting spider's huge body was like a metallic spider monster. Not only did it have great strength, but it also had a completely different fighting style. The burning man's outer shell cracked, turning into drifting sparks that scattered in all directions. A human magus appeared there, raising his head and staring at the hunting spider that was pouncing towards him. He had black hair, black eyes, starry eyebrows, and bright eyes. There was a coldness and calmness between his brows that was far beyond that of a normal person. The style of his gray magus robe was very ordinary, and a book of magus spells hung on a silver chain around his waist. 3 stones that were flashing red, purple, and blue hovered above his head, and he held a powerful black staff with red patterns in his hand. Facing the hunting spider's sharp limbs and giant pincers, Grim's body moved slightly, and he retreated 20 to 30 meters. He waved the staff in his hand, and a swift flame arrow hit the open mouth of the hunting spider just in time. The giant pincers twisted slightly, and the flame arrow was shattered into a wave of heat. Such a small amount of heat would not affect the powerful hunting spider at all. The hunting spider's abnormally sharp limbs were as light as a feather, and they quickly pierced through the sea of lava, but did not break it. The hunting spider carried its body and quickly pounced towards Grim. No wonder it was not threatened by him. It really did have such a strange ability, Grim thought, as he quickly transformed into a Balrog. The next moment, a 5-meter-tall Balrog rose from the sea of lava. Chapter 4:15. How terrifying would a monster at the peak of the elite stage fight at full power? Grimm did not know this before, but now he did. The battle with the hunter spider Tula was painful. The body of the hunter spider, which seemed to be made of metal, had outstanding magic resistance. Although its physical resistance was slightly weaker, it was more than enough to defend against Grimm's weak close-range attacks. The battle between the two of them on the surface of the slowly rising sea of lava was extremely tragic. If Grimm had not been smart enough to unseal the Balrog's heart, he would have been skewered into a meat skewer by Tula's sharp limbs. The pair of pincers at the front of Tula's mouth were even more terrifying than he had imagined. Grimm tried his best to burn Tula's body with his flame barrier, but it did not affect its ability to continue fighting. Its body, which was as heavy as a truck, could move freely on the surface of the sea of lava. Its movements were as swift as a water spider. Tula's 4 pairs of sharp limbs moved quickly, moving its huge body around Grimm at top speed. Once it found an opportunity, it would pounce on Grimm, its sharp limbs whistling through the air. They were like 2 metal spears stabbing towards Grimm's head and chest. An ordinary fire shield wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack. Even the upgraded lava shield would only be able to hold on for 1 round. Every time the sharp appendages slashed past, a deep gash would appear on the half-meter-thick lava shield, almost cutting it in half. Grimm could only use lava fireballs or flame whips to counterattack. As for other fire spells that required chanting and hand gestures, there was no need for him to use them. This was because these spells needed to be prepared. Even if Felik had prepared them, the other party would have already wandered to the periphery. With the agility of the hunter spider, the accuracy of Grimm's spells would plummet when the distance between them was reduced to 20 meters. Rather than expending a lot of effort to cast a powerful spell that would be dodged, it was better to use instant spells to wear down the hunter spider's defensive force field. The lava rain formed by the explosion of the lava fireballs was an area of effect spell. When it landed on the hunter spider's body, it would cause quite a bit of burn damage. As for the flame whips that directly hit it, they would leave a deep burn mark on its body. Without a dozen or so hours of effort, Tula couldn't rely on his powerful recovery ability to get rid of the flame damage. Therefore, the two sides dashed left and right on the surface of the magma sea, seizing every opportunity to attack each other. But at the same time, they tried to dodge each other's attacks. In less than 2 minutes, Grimm's fire shield and lava shield were completely destroyed. If it wasn't for the Ion Stone's energy shield, he would have been running around like a pineapple by now. After realizing this, Tula changed its style of dodging every time it fired a shot. Instead, it charged at Grimm with all its might, not giving him a chance to replenish his external barrier. Under the ferocious attacks of the hunter spiders, Grimm's magma armor began to show crisscrossing scars. Once the armor was damaged, the hunter demon spider's next attack would directly threaten Grimm's body. If he wanted something, he had to pay the price. When Tula rushed to Grimm's side and attacked without restraint, it was equivalent to sending itself into the muzzle of a powerful fire wizard. Molten Core, Rapid Fireball, Flaming Storm, Lava Pillar. Terrifying fire spells erupted between the two of them, and ferocious flame shockwaves baptized Tula's body over and over again, while the terrifying magma that corroded his bones and flesh burned his body until there wasn't an inch of skin left unscathed. No matter how high Tula's magic resistance was, there was a limit. After Grimm's second transformation, the terrifying Balrog was able to break through Tula's magic resistance limit and madly deal fire damage to it. What made Tula even more uncomfortable was that every fire spell Grimm cast seemed to have a trace of annihilation property. This allowed him to break through Tula's defenses no matter how small the fire elemental spell was, bringing him immense pain and shocking damage from the flames. And the source of all this was the strange magic wand in his hand. Perhaps because he had poured too much fire elemental energy into it, the black staff with red stripes and a dark red crystal embedded at the tip had turned into a pure fire staff. Violent and ferocious elemental flames encircled the body of the staff, and at the core of the flames was a purple flame. For some reason, every time Grimm swung his fire staff and struck the hunter demon spider's hard, furry body, the flames would scatter, and the shattered purple flames would fall on Tula's body. The small flames would cause Tula to scream in pain, unable to suppress the deep fear in his soul, and quickly hide far away. It seemed that the purple flames had a strange ability to burn the soul. Grimm had relied on this method to evade the demon hunter spider Tula's attacks many times, giving himself the opportunity to repair his lava armor. As for the repair materials, he had plenty of them. As long as he bent down and smeared them on his body, the scratches and cracks would disappear after a while, and he would be as good as new. After all, the lava ocean was Grimm's home ground. There was no doubt that Grimm had the upper hand in this battle, and he could close the gap between him and the hunter demon spider Tula. Regardless of whether Grimm wanted to admit it or not, there was indeed a huge gap between him and Tula. It was like a barefoot farmer fighting a battle-hardened warrior. If the farmer did not have a deadly weapon in his hand, this battle would have ended long ago. In order to deal with this battle, Grimm had long since stored 6 powerful single-target spells in the secret voodoo scroll hanging on his waist. Once he locked onto Tula's position, he would use this weapon to turn him into a roasted spider. However, the experienced Tula seemed to be able to sense the threat of the secret voodoo scroll. Once it discovered that Grimm had picked up the secret voodoo scroll in close combat, it would immediately move away from him and quickly move about 20 meters away from him, using venom balls and spider webs to slow down Grimm's movements. It had to be said that today's battle environment was extremely disadvantageous to the hunter demon spider. The reason why the hunter demon spider was able to make a name for itself in various regions was because of the spider webs that could stick people to the spot and the terrifying grappling technique. The spider webs could restrict the enemy's freedom of movement, while the grappling technique allowed the hunter demon spider's 4 pairs of sharp limbs and a pair of giant pincers to instantly form a terrifying multiple attack. Even a man made of steel would not be able to escape the fate of being poked into a hornet's nest. Unfortunately, this was not something that could be replicated in the lava ocean. In this kind of environment, Grimm, a professional fire wizard, could display a terrifying 200% of his combat power. Although the hunter demon spider Tula still had a full body since the start of the battle, it was aware of the terrifying burns and fire damage it had to endure at every moment. If a lava fireball hit its shell, it might only leave a basin-sized burn mark. If the sticky and heavy lava splashed onto the demon hunter spider's body, it would also float down its smooth shell. But in this process, it could not avoid the fire damage and the excruciating pain it had to endure. Grimm moved around in the sea of fire, quickly attacking and defending the hunter demon spider while calmly communicating with the wizard's pagoda. From time to time, the wizard's pagoda would shoot out lava fireballs, attacking the giant spider that was moving at high speed. After the initial panic, the rest of the monster leaders saw that the magma sea was still rising, so they joined the battle between the 2 elite powerhouses. The Medusa relied on her long snake-like tail to move around the stone pillars and walls like a lizard. Sometimes, she could even move around the high ceilings. The strange longbow in her hand also unleashed a terrifying power. The arrows she shot out were actually her own snake hair. Every time she drew the longbow with all her might, a silver snake would crawl out of her hair and onto the bowstring. When this kind of arrow was shot in front of the enemy, it would instantly soften into a twisting body, opening its mouth and madly biting at the enemy. If it wasn't for Grimm's powerful flame boundary that burnt every snake arrow that got close to him, even he would not have been able to avoid being entangled by the venomous snakes. As for the 3-headed magic hound Angua, it obviously did not have the Medusa's wall climbing technique. It could only use its claws and feet to dig into the stone pillars and climb up bit by bit, trying its best to stay as far away from the lava ocean as possible. It did not have the ability to attack Grimm, and instead had to defend against the lava fireballs from the wizard's pagoda. Its 3 giant heads stared in all directions, and no matter what approached it, it would not hesitate to spit out a series of wind daggers, fireballs, and venomous balls. The giant berserk baboon was clearly more suited for this kind of guerrilla warfare. It grabbed onto the stone walls with its steel-like claws and leaped over them as if it was flying. It would even grab a piece of the wall from time to time and throw it at Grim. Every time it hit Grim, it would cause him to stumble, then create the best opportunity for the magic hunter spider Tula to attack. The more sinister, dark tentacle monster climbed onto the ceiling like an octopus, then leaped onto the wizard's pagoda. It swam around, looking for an opening to break through. Its partner was the twin-legged flying dragon king. The twin-legged flying dragon king had a powerful body and thick, sharp claws. Every time it swooped down, it would cause sporadic damage to the wizard's pagoda. The damaged walls of the wizard's pagoda were covered in stone powder, and the terrifying cracks on the walls were shocking. If not for the fact that they were worried about the concentrated lava fireballs, with their cooperation, they might have already dug through the walls of the wizard's pagoda and gone on a killing spree. This was also because the wizard's pagoda did not have enough energy to put up a force field protection and elemental barrier. Otherwise, they would not have been able to attack the wizard's pagoda so easily. The situation on the battlefield was extremely tense. No matter which side lost control of the situation first, they might be instantly turned upside down by the other side. Chapter 416. Within the wizard's pagoda. The battle taking place outside caused every acolyte who was in the middle of attacking the spell formation to feel their blood surge. Yet they were also trembling with fear. Most of the time, they hoped that they could be like Lord Grim, standing proudly in the middle of the magical creature's encirclement, killing everything in its path. On the other hand, they were also worried about the situation before them, afraid that something would go wrong and allow those ugly magical creatures to sneak in. For the sake of the wizard's pagoda, for the sake of their own lives, all of the wizard apprentices were working hard to control the attack spell formation. Every time they formed a lava fireball, they would do their best to throw it at the detestable tentacle monster that was wandering around the walls of the pagoda, as well as the twin-legged flying dragon king that was locked in combat with the chimera leader. In the sky, the fireballs exploded, sending ripples of flames everywhere. The two parties in the battle were constantly circling around the wizard's pagoda, clashing with each other from time to time, unleashing a soul-stirring and ferocious battle. Even his subordinate chimera was fighting with its life on the line. How could Grim, the master of the wizard's pagoda, be safe? Facing the attacks of the demon hunter spider Tula, Medusa, and giant wild baboon, Grim's terrifying flame demon was forced to retreat, only able to passively defend himself against the door of the wizard's pagoda. Fortunately, the sea of lava was still rising, already swallowing all the entrances and exits of the lava hall, reaching the terrifying height of the first level of the wizard's pagoda. Grim stood on the sea of magma, his feet turning into a semi-molten magma substance, continuously absorbing the viscous magma beneath his feet to repair his damaged body. As the time limit for his transformation was up, Grim had no choice but to retreat from his second transformation. He resealed the flame demon's heart, relying only on the first level of the flame demon transformation to barely deal with the leaders of the magical creatures, quietly waiting for the moment when the sea of lava completely swallowed up the lava hall. Perhaps realizing that the situation before them would only worsen, the magical creatures that had been hoping for the sea of lava to quickly recede came to their senses. Even protecting themselves in such a terrible situation was a problem for them, and the number of them that could attack Grim could be counted on one hand. Seeing that they were starting to get restless, the forest demon Ava had no choice but to reveal herself. She left the stone pillar she was resting on and flew to the center of the crowd of monsters. A strong and strange spiritual wave swept across the entire area. Eternal slumber. It was a very simple and ordinary mental spell that could lead living beings into a sweet dream. If it was a normal monster, it would have fallen asleep and become a fish on the forest demon's chopping board. However, Those that were able to survive until now were all powerful monsters. If not for the magma preventing them from moving freely, Grimm's situation would have been even worse. All the monsters affected by eternal slumber couldn't help but fall into a trance wherever Lin Yao's strange mental ripples swept through. Normally, this would be over in the time it took for them to take a nap, but the reality was that they were all forced to the tall stone pillars or walls by the magma sea like geckos. Without a foothold, they used all kinds of twisted and strange postures to force themselves to cling to the rock wall. While he was distracted, 2 of the remaining 4 monsters shuddered and fell from the places they were clinging to into the sea of lava below. One of them was the 3-headed devil hound, Ngujia. The viscous and tumbling magma instantly scalded their skin and flesh. The semi-liquid magma had no place to borrow strength from. They struggled and roared frantically, but they couldn't stop the terrifying heat and flames from penetrating their bodies. Their bodies made of flesh and blood were instantly burned red. The sizzling sound of their flesh and magma colliding with each other was enough to make one's teeth ache and legs go weak. The entire area was instantly filled with the thick smell of burnt flesh. Of the 2 monsters that fell into the magma sea, only one managed to escape successfully, and that was the 3-headed devil hound. Ngujia, after all, it was the leader of the monsters, and its physique was much better than that of the other ordinary monster. Even so, Ngujia, who had leaped out of the sea of magma along with a rain of fire, still met a tragic end. A dull thud sounded. A huge fire bubble appeared in the viscous magma, and Ngujia leaped out of it with a mournful cry. Its charred claws grabbed onto a stone pillar tightly, and it climbed up again. The eyes of all the monsters could not help but fall on it. Hiss! A few of the monsters gasped in shock. The heroic and mighty 3-headed devil hound, Ngujia, had turned into a mangy dog that no one could bear to look at. The fur and skin on its body had already peeled off, and what was left were terrifying black and purple scorch marks of varying shades. After being soaked in the magma for 7 or 8 minutes, Ngujia's half-centimeter thick skin and flesh had already been completely charred. As it struggled and jumped, the charred skin on its body started to crack and peel off, revealing the bright red flesh, wriggling muscle fibers, and undulating blood vessels underneath. Large and small blood blisters were all over his body. Blood and body fluids were constantly flowing out of his flesh and blood. Every time a blood bubble burst, purplish-black blood and pungent bodily fluids would splatter out. Ngujia looked as if a layer of its skin had been peeled off and roasted on a bonfire. There wasn't a single piece of flesh on its body that wasn't damaged. Its entire body was red and dripping with blood. The rest of the monsters could empathize with Ngujia's predicament. All of them turned their hateful gazes toward the culprit, Lin Yao. Almost instantly, a series of purplish-black lightning flames and poisonous acid engulfed the area where Lin Yao was. Forest demon Ava let out a pathetic cry as she quickly escaped from the side of the monsters, desperately flying toward the wizard's pagoda that was half submerged in the sea of magma. Grimm and the rest of the group, who were still fiercely defending the wizard's pagoda, also noticed the commotion in the distance. Tula's spiderweb spray, the Medusa's snake arrows, and the giant berserk baboon's giant rocks immediately formed an impenetrable line of defense. They had the intention of killing the traitor Lin Yao in one fell swoop. Gargamel, who had been guarding the wizard's pagoda all this while, was instantly scared out of his wits. He flew out and shouted loudly toward Grimm, "Save her!" At the same time, Grimm's tall flame demon body had already disappeared from its original spot, emerging from the sea of magma beneath Lin Yao. "Come down!" Grimm waved the wizard's staff in his hand, and a terrifying suction force pulled Lin Yao down from the sky. Then a monstrous wave of fire soared into the sky, forming a protective wall that blocked the attack. When the giant rocks thrown by the giant berserk baboons blasted away the giant wave, the 2 of them were no longer in the circle of fire. Grimm's tall figure once again emerged from the sea of magma. He gently pushed the unharmed Lin Yao into the wizard's pagoda. Only then did he raise his hand and pull out the snake arrow that was biting into his shoulder. He had grabbed it by 7 inches, and the struggling poisonous snake could not bite his palm no matter how hard it struggled. Then, the poisonous snake was instantly charred by the flames on Grimm's hand. He gently rubbed it, and it turned into a cloud of ash that scattered down. What? Are you still not going to admit your defeat today? Grimm's black eyes stared expressionlessly at the Medusas for a moment, then said coldly, "If you run now, you still have a chance to escape this underground area. If you continue fighting, all of you will be buried in the sea of magma." Following Grimm's threat, Meryl and Gargamel flew out of the wizard's pagoda together, floating in the air and staring coldly at the leaders of the magical creatures. At this point, all of their tribesmen and servants have been buried in the sea of magma beneath their feet. If they continue to fight to the death, they will be forcing Grimm to have showdown with them. Human, you're at the end of your rope, aren't you? The demon hunter spider Tula, who was hanging upside down on the ceiling, rubbed its ferocious, lotus-shaped mouthpart against each other, its angry mind language exploding in the air. "You've killed so many of our tribesmen, and you still want to scare us away? TSK, TSK, TSK. I can't wait to break into your wizard's pagoda and taste the fresh blood and flesh inside." The eyes of the few leaders of the magical creatures turned bloodshot when they heard Tula's words. The wizard's pagoda's tactic of using the underground lava was too vicious, instantly killing all of the clansmen and servants they had brought with them. Even if they managed to escape this place today, they were destined to be commanders without an army. When they thought of this, they couldn't suppress the anger in their hearts, and they immediately gathered around Linley again. Seeing that there was no turning back, Grimm immediately sent his mental energy into the control center of the wizard's pagoda and selected a red command without hesitation among the many options. In the next second, the wizard's pagoda that was half submerged in the sea of magma shuddered, and thousands of jets of magma shot out from various parts of the wizard's pagoda, instantly creating a beautiful scene of fireworks. As soon as this move was used, the faces of all the demonic creatures in the field instantly turned pale. This attack covered the entire area, a terrifying rain of fire that engulfed the entire lava hall. How? How are they going to dodge this? How are they going to escape? The magical creatures in the area immediately split into 2 factions. One faction, led by the demon hunter Spider Tula, charged toward the wizard's pagoda without any regard for its own life, wanting to carve out a path of survival. The other faction, led by the shadow tentacle monster, turned around and escaped without hesitation, pouncing toward the far end of the lava hall. As long as they could find a crack or crevice in the ground large enough to pass through, the tentacle monster that could transform its body was confident that it could escape. Following Tula toward the wizard's pagoda were Medusa and the giant furious baboon. As for the twin-legged flying dragon king, it chose to escape with the shadow tentacle monster. It had no choice. The battle with the chimeras had left the twin-legged flying dragon king heavily injured, and it no longer had the confidence to barge into the unfathomable wizard's pagoda. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.